Chapter 4487. For many things, the closer you are to life and death, the easier it is for you to think things through. He really thought that he was going to lose you. Lying in bed, Hua Jin replayed Alice's words over and over in his mind. If it were not for her, he would not have known that he was so important to Gong Jie. But he could not figure out why someone as outstanding as Gong Jie would like him. Alice could not help but laugh when she heard that. Like is too abstract. Take me as an example. The first time I saw Gong Jie, I inexplicably fell in love with him. I can't remember what I really liked about him. But I vaguely remember that I was deeply infatuated with his youthful frivolity and high-spirited spirit. She liked him, even if it was just a glance. She did not understand why she would become crazy once she fell in love with others, even though she was very rational when it came to love. When Gong Jie was infected with the amyla virus, I liked him. In order to save him, I did not hesitate to use myself as a test subject. I could not believe that there would be such a day where I would be so cruel to myself and use myself as a test subject. At that time, I actually did not have any expectations. I even thought that if the experiment failed, at least he would not be lonely with me by his side. But I never thought that because of my sacrifice, I would want him to repay me. If he liked me, so be it. Until I found out that the person he liked was you, I had no complaints. Alice laughed evilly as she said, "Humph, at least I would feel better in my heart. Otherwise, I would be very sad." In Alice's room, she took out many photos of Gong Jie when he was young. When she was helping Gong Jie to tidy up his room, she felt that the photos of Gong Jie when he was young were especially cute and interesting. Hence, she secretly hid the photos for herself. Usually, she could not bear to take them out. She took out the photos and showed them to Hua Jin. In the photos, most of them were photos of Gong Jie when he was young. Alice sighed with emotion as she showed Hua Jin the signboard. "Xiao Jie really likes you a lot." There was an unspeakable envy in her tone. "I've never seen him smile at anyone like that." Hua Jin flipped through the photos one by one. In the photos, whether it was when he was young or after he grew up, Gong Jie always had a cold and unsmiling face when facing the camera. He seemed to really hate smiling. There was a picture of the Gong family in uniform. Everyone was wearing the uniform of the Gong family's private navy. Gong Jie was standing in the middle of the last row. His gaze was terrifyingly gloomy. It was hard to imagine that the young man in the picture was actually Gong Jie in his youth. Looks like the murderous aura is very strong. His murderous aura is indeed very strong. I've always thought that Gong Jie was a very heartless and cold-blooded person. I remember there's a saying that if a person's murderous aura is very strong, then his life would be very tough. Even the king of hell would not dare to take him. We all laughed that Xiao Jie would definitely live a long life. Ha! Alice laughed and let out a long sigh of relief. However, Xiao Jie has really changed a lot now. Other than Xianxia, you've changed him a lot too. Hua Jin sighed. What have I done to deserve it? Chapter 4488. When he returned to his room, Hua Jin was still absent-minded. He lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. His heart gradually calmed down. He closed his eyes and stopped thinking so much. The next day, when Hua Jin woke up, Alice told him that Gong Jie had left at dawn. Hua Jin was a little absent-minded. He didn't know why, but he had an ominous premonition. It was Gong Jie's order to arrange for Hua Jin and Natalia to stay on Dark Wind Island. After all, Hua Jin was facing many threats at that time. Gong Jie couldn't let him go as long as the remnants of the Sacred Hall were not eliminated. He didn't want to be kidnapped again. Yu and Xiao Yichen took a private jet back to China. Because Yueyao had a fever on the eve of his birthday. The two of them had stayed on Dark Wind Island for a long time. Yu's condition had stabilized. They missed Yueyao very much. Since it was Yueyao's birthday, the two of them had decided to go back early. They didn't expect Yueyao to have a fever. Yueyao was 4 years old. It wasn't a small matter for a child at this age to have a fever. Xianxia was very nervous. The family doctor said that it was best to do a comprehensive checkup. It was safer to go to the hospital. Many children at this age contracted pneumonia because the doctor didn't do a comprehensive checkup. Therefore, she nervously carried the child to the hospital. In the hospital, Yueyao had a fever of 39 degrees Celsius. It was said that the fever alternated between warm and cold. When Yueyao fell asleep at night, he liked to kick the blanket because of the heat. When it was late at night, the temperature turned cold and he caught a cold. Once a child caught a cold, his fever rose quickly. The doctor suggested that he stay in the hospital for observation. During the observation period, Yueyao's condition gradually stabilized. Then, Xianxia was surprised to find that she met a child in the hospital. Jingyang. Xianxia had a deep impression of this child. The first time she saw this child was when she and Gu Xingzi had an accident. She lost her sight and Gu Xingzi donated his corneas to another child, Jingyang. At that time, her eyes had not recovered, so she did not see what the child looked like. However, even though she couldn't see, she had held the child before. Coincidentally, he met Jingyang this time because Jingyang had caught a cold and had a fever, just like Yueyao. The two children stayed in the same ward and on the same floor. Xianxia happened to see Jingyang when she was fetching water for Yueyao. He had just finished his 4-drip, and the lively little guy was clamoring to get out of bed for a walk. When he passed by Yueyao's ward, he heard Yueyao crying because she was taking his temperature. The little fellow curiously went to the door and bumped into Xianxia, who was about to get hot water. The little bun bumped into her leg. Xianxia did not know who he was, but she was attracted by the little fellow's handsome face at first sight. He was really cute. He had a pair of big watery eyes, and the pupils were amber. They were mesmerizing, and his long eyelashes were thick and curly. He was very cute. His skin was fairer than the average girl's, and his lips were pink. They were not too rosy, but they were not too pale either. The shape of his lips was unusually good-looking, like jelly. Chapter 4489. When he saw Xianxia, the little guy took half a step back timidly. He was obviously a little shy and afraid. There was still a fever patch on his forehead. So it was also because of a fever? Xianxia squatted down and asked him his name. However, the little guy was very vigilant. He shook his head and intertwined his hands. Obviously, he was unwilling to say and was very vigilant. Beside him, the little bun's mother rushed over. When she saw that her son had rushed to the door of someone else's ward, she quickly rushed over and bowed to Xianxia to apologize. However, when she recognized that it was Xianxia, her eyes widened in disbelief. "It's you?" Xianxia was a little surprised. "Do you know me?" She was not too curious. That was because too many people knew her. However, this woman's surprise did not seem like she had seen a superstar, but an old friend. "Xianxia, is that you?" The woman picked up the little bun and smiled as she held the little bun's hand. She waved at her. "Come Yang, say hello to Auntie." Seeing that his mother seemed to know this auntie, the little bun opened his mouth and called out in a childish voice, "Auntie, Miss Yun, it's me. This is my son. His name is Jingyang. Do you still remember him?" "Ah." Xianxia let out a short, "huh." In an instant, her gaze landed on Jingyang again, but her eyes were already red with emotion. This child was the child who received Xingjia's cornea donation. When Yang was born, he was the same as other children, but as he gradually grew up, other children began to look at the world curiously. However, he lay in the crib, motionless, and didn't know how to fool around. I teased him with toys, but he didn't have any reaction. Although his eyes were wide open, they weren't focused. Jingqi sat on the bed and chatted with Xianxia. Beside her, Jingyang was lying beside Yueyao's bed. He held his little head and curiously sized up the little girl who was about the same age as him. He stared at her curiously and carefully reached out to poke her face from time to time. Yueyao had just had a fever injection and was already asleep. Xianxia was listening attentively. Jingqi continued, "He was always lying still. I was afraid that something would happen to the child. I sent him to the hospital and found out that the child had a congenital cornea defect. The doctor said that it might be because I didn't get enough nutrition when I was pregnant, but he couldn't rule out other reasons. In any case, the child was born with a problem with his eyes. When I found out about this, I was so worried that I couldn't sleep well for a few nights. The child's surgery fees are a problem, not to mention the scarce source of cornea donors. Xianxia looked at Jing Yang and felt pity for him. Perhaps it was love for the house, love its crow. For the past few years, she had been missing Gu Xingzi. In this child, she seemed to see the continuation of Gu Xingzi's life. Thank you very much. If it wasn't for Mr. Gu Xingzi, I wouldn't know what to do. I also thought of donating my own cornea to him, but the doctor said that the hospital doesn't have the right to perform such a surgery. I like this child. Not only is this child beautiful, but he gives me a sense of familiarity. Chapter 4490. The person had passed away, and the living were like this. Jingqi lowered her head, feeling a little sad. She suddenly said, "Actually, I didn't know about Gu Xingzi before, but after that, I went to watch many of his movies, including The Green Apple, that you guys filmed together." After a pause, Jingqi didn't know if she should mention this. "I think Mr. Gu Xingzi likes you very much, right?" Xianxia looked at her in surprise. "I'm sorry," Jingqi lowered her head guiltily. "Actually, I know that with my identity, I shouldn't mention this. However, the movie, The Green Apple, especially, made me cry. It's too touching. We're clearly in love, but we have to be in so much pain. I've watched this movie several times. Moreover, from this movie, I can tell that the way Mr. Gu Xingzi looks at you is from the bottom of his heart. It's not an act." Xianxia suddenly fell silent. Jingqi continued, "I'm very sad about Mr. Gu Xingzi's accident, but I also hope that you can let him go. I think that if there's a next life, perhaps the two of you will meet again at a certain street corner. Look, fate is really a magical thing. We actually met here again and even stayed in the ward next door. Don't you think this is a magical thing?" Xianxia heard this and agreed. She suddenly asked curiously, "I've never seen your husband. Where's Yang father?" When Jingqi heard this, she suddenly lowered her eyelashes sadly, her eyes filled with disappointment. "His father? What's wrong?" Xianxia saw her melancholic expression and became uneasy. "Did something happen? Just tell me. If I can help you, I'll do my best." "Thank you, Xia. But, actually, I didn't mention the child's father to you last time because I'm actually not married yet." "Not married?" Xianxia's heart skipped a beat. She inexplicably saw herself in this lonely and stubborn woman. 5 years ago, I fell in love with a man and wanted to be with him without hesitation. But now, it seems that I'm like a moth flying into a flame. Until the child was born, he had no intention of marrying me. Only then did I realize that the man I foolishly loved didn't love me. When father and mother found out that I had a child out of wedlock, they were furious and wanted me to sell the child. As Jingqi spoke, her eyes were slightly moist. "Speaking of which, I'm ashamed. Back then, I did have such an idea. Originally, when the child was born, I had the idea of marrying that man. However, when I realized that the man wouldn't marry me, the child was also diagnosed with a cornea defect. My mother convinced me that since that man didn't want me, it would be difficult for me to remarry with a child. You know, many men are very concerned about a woman's past. I thought that even if the child had the opportunity to undergo surgery, the medical fees were not something I could afford. I was thinking that I might as well entrust the child to a good family. Perhaps he might be able to live a happier life." Chapter 4491. You have to know that this child hasn't cried much since he was born. He cried so hard that even my mother was scared. I believed that this was a telepathic connection between him and me. When we reached the door of that family, I immediately regretted it. I knelt in front of my mother with the child in my arms and begged bitterly. My mother's heart softened, so she didn't take that wrong step. Xianxia asked worriedly, "Later, did your parents accept this child?" Jingqi sighed and shook her head. "No, my father didn't accept it in the end. He even threatened to cut off our father-daughter relationship. My mother's heart ached for me. Although she didn't agree with my actions and felt that this child would delay my life, she would occasionally sneak a few glances at me and the child behind my father's back. Yang is very sensible, obedient, and she likes him very much. My mother likes this child now." As she said this, Jingqi looked at Jingyang with eyes full of love. By the bed, Jingyang was gently fiddling with Yueyao's long eyelashes with his small hands. Yueyao was sleeping peacefully. When Jingqi saw him, she immediately stopped him in a low voice. Yang, don't touch, Mom. Her eyebrows are so beautiful. Jingyang turned his head, his eyes bright as if there were many little stars. They're just like dolls. So cute. Little fool, those are eyelashes, not eyebrows. Oh. Eyelashes. Jingyang muttered eyelashes silently. He was so young that he couldn't even distinguish eyelashes from eyebrows. Don't touch your sister. She's sick, understand? Xianxia smiled and said, It's okay. When Jingyang heard this, he replied with an oh. He turned his head and looked at Yueyao, his heart full of love. So cute. She was even cuter than a doll. This little sister was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. Jingqi said to Jingyang, Let's go back to our room and take your medicine obediently. Then, take an afternoon nap, okay? In the past, Jingyang would definitely listen to her words. But now he didn't say a word. He lowered his head and pouted. It was obvious that he was unwilling. Jingqi was surprised. Was this little guy throwing a tantrum? Jingyang was now in kindergarten. Because of his handsome and cute appearance, he was very popular with the girls in the class. However, he liked to play with boys. Even if there were so many girls chasing after him to play with him, he would ignore them all. Although Jingyang was well behaved in front of her, he was actually very naughty when he was with the other boys in the class. It was also from the class teacher that he found out that many girls in the class were jealous of him. Jingqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At such a young age, she already knows how to be jealous? However, Jingyang, who never liked to play with girls, was unwilling to go back to the ward because of the Yueyao. Jingqi seemed to have seen through his thoughts. Do you think your sister is very cute and want to stay and accompany her? What's her name? Xianxia also squatted down and looked at him at eye level. She looked at him and said, Her name is Yueyao, Mu Yueyao. Yueyao. Jingyang seriously and methodically learned to speak. Finally, he said Yueyao's name very clearly. She's sick. Jingyang lay by the bed and looked, obviously unwilling to leave. Chapter 4492. When Xianxia saw this, she said to Jingqi, Since he likes to be with Yueyao, let him stay. When Jingqi heard this, she said cautiously, Will it cause you trouble? How can that be? I can't even wait to like him. Xianxia and Jingqi chatted idly. At first, Jingqi was still a little nervous. After all, Xianxia was a public figure and a big star. She was afraid that she had said something wrong. But later on, Xianxia gave her an extremely amiable feeling, and she gradually opened her mouth. The women sat together and talked about nothing more than the children's problems. As they chatted, Jingyang let out a surprised sound. But Yueyao is awake. Xianxia and Jingqi turned their heads in unison and saw Yueyao slowly opening her eyes. The moment she opened her eyes, they seemed to emit a dazzling light like diamonds. Jingyang, who was lying at the side, actually suffocated. So beautiful. Jingyang had originally stayed by Yueyao's side out of curiosity. He saw that her face was red from fever and her eyelashes were long. Even though her eyes were closed, it wasn't hard to imagine how adorable she was. However, when Yueyao opened her eyes, Jingyang felt that his breathing was almost stagnant. He was afraid that his breath would accidentally wrinkle such a beautiful face. Jingqi saw that Jingyang's face was actually red and found it strange. Yang, why is your face red? Jingyang heard this but did not say anything. Xianxia also saw his red face. Yueyao opened her eyes. They flickered softly like the fluttering wings of a butterfly. She turned to look at Xianxia and pouted. Mommy, Yueyao hurts. Where does it hurt? Head. Yueyao's speech was not very smooth. She was slurring her words, but they sounded extremely cute. When Jingqi heard this, she immediately urged Jingyang to say, Yang, sister says she has a headache. Do you want to rub it for her? Can I? Of course. Jingyang timidly stretched out his small hand. Yueyao then saw an unfamiliar boy lying on the bed. She was a little scared and pulled up the quilt to cover half of her small face. She only used a pair of eyes to secretly size him up. Jing Yang's face turned even redder. However, he refused to retract his hand. Instead, he leaned forward. His small hand was carefully placed on her forehead. Yueyao looked at him and then at his hand on her forehead. She licked her dry lips and finally revealed a little of her face. Jing Yang smiled at her and immediately said, "I'm Jing Yang. You can call me Yang Yang." Yang Yang. Yueyao was still a little shy. She was so afraid of strangers. Since she was young, other than Yun Shirshir and Yu Yu, it was difficult for others to hold her for a while. Yun Shirshir was surprised that Jing Yang could touch her forehead. This child has been afraid of strangers since she was young. Yun Shirshir explained, "I thought she would cry when she woke up and saw Yang Yang." "So afraid of strangers? My Yang Yang has never been afraid of strangers since he was young, but this child is very smart. He was almost kidnapped by human traffickers when he was young." Kidnapped? Chapter 4493. The nurse came to make ward rounds and found Jing Yang's room. Seeing that he was not around, she went next door, but she did not expect Jing Qi to bring Jing Yang to another room. Seeing Yun Shirshir and Jing Qi sitting together, the nurse was a little surprised. "Ah, do you know each other?" Yun Shirshir and Jing Qi nodded tacitly. "Yes, we know each other." "Yang Yang, come over and take the temperature. Have you taken your medicine?" As Jing Yang was beautiful and polite, all the nurses on the entire floor liked him. His little mouth was sweet and especially likable. Jing Qi quickly stood up. "Not yet." The nurse walked over and handed the sterilized thermometer to Jing Yang. Jing Yang obediently put it in his mouth and stared at the nurse with wide eyes. He asked incoherently, "Have I recovered?" The nurse tapped his head. "You're almost recovered. Then, can I still stay here?" His words undoubtedly amused the group of people. The nurse could not stop laughing. "Yang Yang, don't tell me you can't bear to part with us and refuse to leave." Jing Yang did not speak and only looked at the nurse eagerly. The nurse explained, "When you recover, you can be discharged. You can't stay here anymore. The beds here are all prepared for patients." When Jing Qi heard this, she looked at the nurse. "Has his fever gone down?" "It's almost stable. As long as he doesn't catch a cold and try not to be exposed to the cold wind at night, it won't happen again." When Jing Yang heard that he could not stay in the hospital after recovering, he could not help but feel extremely disappointed. The nurse also took Yueyao's temperature and gave him an injection to reduce his fever, but his temperature had decreased a lot. "Liao's mother, why don't you take Yueyao for a walk downstairs? While the sun is good in the afternoon, he can sweat a little and recover faster." "Okay," Jing Qi suggested. "I saw the nurse say that Yang Yang is almost recovered. He can be discharged tomorrow. Why don't we go for a walk in the hospital's back garden? The hospital's back garden is specially manicured. When I took Yang Yang down yesterday, the little guy couldn't walk when he saw the bubble machine. I didn't buy it yesterday and the little guy was angry with me. Today, I can buy one to compensate him." Yun Shirshir also nodded. Mu Yazhe was not around, and Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen would only arrive the next day. She had been taking care of Yueyao the whole day. Yun Shirshir carried Yueyao and Jing Qi to the back garden. When Jing Yang saw the back garden, he was very excited. He took the 5 yuan that Jing Qi handed him and ran to the hospital's convenience store to buy a bubble machine. He held up the bubble machine and ran back to Yueyao as if he was presenting a treasure. When Yueyao saw this, she was extremely moved. She gently kicked her legs, indicating to Yun Shirshir that she wanted to come down. Yun Shirshir hurriedly put Yueyao down, and the little guy ran to Jing Yang. When the two little guys stood together, Jing Yang was still taller. She stood on her tiptoes and reached for the bubble machine in his hand. Jing Yang was just about to give the bubble machine to Yueyao. When Yun Shirshir saw this, she immediately reminded her, "Yueyao, you're not allowed to snatch it. If you want to play, you have to ask your brother if he agrees." Jing Qi was even more surprised by her good upbringing. Originally, she thought that the child of a big celebrity should be doted on since he was young. His upbringing and etiquette were not outstanding. Chapter 4494. As it turned out, While Xianxia doted on her child, she never neglected her education. In Yueyao's heart, Xianxia was very prestigious. She had never hit her, but the little girl was willing to listen to her. When Yueyao heard Xianxia's words, she retracted her hand and asked carefully, "Can you lend it to me to play with?" Of course, Jingyang was willing to let her play with it. He could even give it to her. Originally, he had wanted to play with it yesterday, but because Jingqi didn't buy it immediately and forgot to bring cash, he could only watch the other children play. When some of the children saw him standing alone, they took the initiative to come over and invite him to join them. But Jingyang wasn't willing. After returning to the ward, the night passed. When he woke up, he was no longer interested in the bubble machine. Jingyang had bought the bubble machine because he felt that Yueyao would like it, so it was a little like presenting a treasure. Jingyang handed the bubble machine to her. Yueyao held the bubble machine in her hand lovingly, raised it high, and took a few steps forward happily. Yang, take Sister Yueyao to play, okay? But the back garden wasn't big. Jingqi and Xianxia were circling the small flower bed. The children were playing in the fitness area and could be seen at a glance. Xianxia could never bear to let Yueyao out of her sight. She and Jingqi sat on the stone bench and chatted, while Jingqi held Yueyao's hand and went to the small square to play with the bubble machine. Yueyao especially liked bubbles. On this day, the afternoon sun was especially good. Under the refraction of the sun, the bubbles that came out were colorful like rainbow balls. Yueyao loved rainbows the most. Every time a bubble came out, she would be foolishly happy for a long time. Jingyang took the bubble machine and sprayed a lot of bubbles on her body. Yueyao suddenly felt like she was surrounded by bubbles. The moment the bubble came into contact with her body, it popped and burst. Instantly, the cool bubbles splashed on her skin, and it felt a little cool. She liked this feeling. Seeing that she liked it so much, Jingqi kept blowing bubbles at her. A child of this age had an extremely rich imagination. It was just a bubble machine and they could play with it. Just like that, the two little guys excitedly played with a bubble pistol for the whole afternoon. They were so happy that Xianxia and Jingqi were unwilling to leave no matter how they called them. They stayed in the square. In the end, when Xianxia carried Yueyao in her arms, Yueyao looked at Jingyang with an aggrieved expression, reluctant to part with him. It turned out that when they were playing, Jingyang told her that he might be discharged from the hospital the next day, and she didn't know if she could see him again. When Yueyao heard this, he was a little absent-minded and started to feel unhappy. Yang, say goodbye to your sister. Jingqi tempted him. Jingyang raised his small hand, but he couldn't bear to wave it away. He just stared at her deeply, obviously unwilling to part with her just like that. But when he heard Jingqi say that Yueyao still had to take medicine when she went back, he waved his hand sensibly. When Jingqi carried him back to the ward, the nurse came to deliver the medicine, but he was unwilling to take it. Be good, Yang. Aren't you going to listen to mommy? You have to be good and take the medicine to recover. However, he shook his head and refused to take it. Didn't the nurse say that I'm almost recovered? Then you have to eat today's portion. I don't want to eat. It's so bitter. Chapter 4495. Under Jingqi's coercion, Jingyang obediently swallowed the pill. However, when Jingqi turned around, the little guy ran to the bathroom and spat out the pill hidden under his tongue. He didn't want to take the medicine. If he took the medicine, he would definitely recover very quickly. At that time, he would have no choice but to be discharged and wouldn't be able to see his little Yueyao. He still wanted to stay in the hospital and play with his little Yueyao. It didn't matter if he had a few more injections. At night, when the nurse came to check on him, she measured his temperature again. Yang, Xiaobao's fever is almost gone. He can be discharged tomorrow. Jingyang stood at the side, his eyes wide open as if he had been struck by lightning. The nurse held the thermometer and looked at Yang, who was widening his eyes. She squatted down and hugged the little guy reluctantly. Auntie really can't bear for Yang to leave. However, Yang can't stay sick forever and stay in the hospital. After he's discharged, he must be careful not to catch a cold. When Jingqi heard that he could be discharged, she asked excitedly, won't his fever return? No, As long as he doesn't catch a cold and be exposed to the cold wind, he'll be fine. Remember, you must use warm water when you bathe. Even if you're washing your face, you can't touch anything cold. When Jing-yang heard this, his heart skipped a beat. At night, the night gradually darkened. Jing-chi hugged him and lay on the bed, sleeping soundly. In the middle of the night, Jing-yang slowly opened his eyes and sensed that his mother, who was sleeping beside him, was already breathing deeply. He knew that she was sleeping soundly. Hence, he quietly sat up, got out of bed, and carefully walked to the bathroom. Then he quickly took off his clothes, stood under the shower, and turned on the cold water. Whoosh! The cold water poured down. Jing-yang hugged his arms and shivered from the cold water. There were only a few words from the nurse in his mind. Don't catch a cold. Don't be exposed to the cold wind. Even if you're washing your face, you can't touch anything cold. Then what the nurse meant was that as long as he caught a cold, he could fall sick again. Thinking of this, even though the water was cold, he still gritted his teeth and endured it until his whole body was shaking. Only then did he walk out of the shower room and dry himself with a towel. Then, with wet hair, he walked to the small garden behind the inpatient building and jogged in the cold wind. After running, he was covered in sweat. He walked to the shower and continued to wash his body with cold water. The next day, the moment Jing-chi woke up, she sensed the slightly rapid breathing beside her. She raised her head and saw Jing-yang nestled in her arms with a red face. Even the breath he exhaled at this moment was boiling hot. She was scared out of her wits and quickly touched his face. It was so hot that she jumped in fright. Why was it so hot? Didn't the nurse say that the fever was almost gone? Why did the fever return? At this age, it was easy for a fever to recur. However, after getting an injection to reduce the fever in the hospital, the nurse and the doctor said that it would not recur again. This sudden relapse made Jing-chi not mentally prepared at all. She had thought that she would recover soon. Chapter 4496. In his groggy consciousness, he could not wait to see if his efforts last night had succeeded. The nurse did not know what his intentions were, so she pressed down on his little hand and carefully stuffed the thermometer into his mouth. What's going on? The nurse looked at Jing-yang worriedly, her heart aching. It looks like his fever is very bad. That's impossible. Didn't his fever go down yesterday? Didn't he cover himself with the blanket last night? That's impossible, Jing-chi said. I only dared to sleep when I saw him fall asleep. Moreover, our Xianxia doesn't have the habit of kicking the blanket. Then why did his fever relapse? The nurse felt extremely worried. Jing-yang's head was about to split open. Last night, he seemed to have been drenched too much, so much so that he felt as if he was being burned. Even his lips seemed to be scalded by the air that he kept exhaling from his nose. However, even with that being the case, he still felt his body shivering nonstop. Jing-yang was looking forward to it. If he had a fever again, then he would be able to accompany his little Yueyao in the hospital. At the thought of being able to play with his little Yueyao, the pain he suffered was nothing. If Jing-chi and the nurse knew that the little guy they were taking care of was asking for this pain, they would definitely be so angry that they did not know whether to laugh or cry. The nurse pulled out the thermometer and looked at the red line. She gasped in shock. Oh my God, 39. 8 degrees? Why is his fever so high? It's even higher than the temperature measured when he entered the hospital. When Jing-chi heard this, she also became worried. Coincidentally, the flu had been more frequent recently. She asked worriedly, could he have contracted the flu? That's impossible. Other than the high fever, there don't seem to be any other similar characteristics. Then, why does it keep going back and forth? Before coming to the hospital, because the fever was not high, he had been using a fever patch. In addition, the nearest children's hospital had prescribed medicine. However, the fever kept going back and forth, and it was getting worse and worse. Jing-chi was worried that it was the flu and was sent to a big hospital. The nurse said, let's get an injection to reduce the fever first. I'll get the chief doctor to come over personally in the afternoon. Okay. Hearing that he had a fever again, the corners of Jing-yang's mouth curled up in relief. Then he almost fainted and lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he was already on an intravenous drip. Because the infusion policy had become strict, especially for children, it was not easy to get infusions. But his fever was too high. The feeling of having a fever was really unpleasant. This time, it was worse than any fever in the past. But he didn't regret it. His only regret was that he had imagined that he would still be able to walk around freely after his fever. He had even gone to the little Yueyao's room to play with the little Yueyao. However, he did not even have the strength to get out of bed. He had obviously miscalculated. He thought that he had deliberately showered in cold water and was only suffering from a fever and a headache. He didn't expect that he would be so weak now. Yueyao, on the other hand, sweated a lot after taking a walk in the back garden yesterday. His temperature had dropped a little, but he still coughed a little. Xianxia originally thought that Jingyang would be discharged today, but she heard that the little guy had a fever again, so she carried the little Yueyao over to have a look. Chapter 4497. Xianxia was also shocked by Jingyang's flushed face. What happened? She walked over worriedly with Yueyao in her arms. Her heart ached as she looked at Jingyang. Why is he burning up again? I don't know. When I woke up, his fever flared up again. His whole body is burning up and he's in a daze from the fever. He can't even speak coherently. Their conversation alarmed Jingyang. He opened his eyes and saw Yueyao. He immediately reached out to grab her. Little Yueyao looked at him and then at Xianxia. She seemed to be using her gaze to ask what was going on. Xianxia patted her head and said, "Little brother is sick. He wants you to keep him company." Yueyao nodded and walked to the bedside. She pushed a stool clumsily to Jingyang's side and then climbed onto the stool and sat down. Jingyang was in a daze. He raised his little hand and saw Yueyao's afterimages. His fever was so high that he was seeing things and people like a spy. Yueyao also stretched out her hand and gently clasped his. She immediately felt his small, scalding hand. "It's so hot." Yueyao's voice was crisp and childish. "His hand feels like a hot water bottle. Little brother is sick. He has a fever just like Yueyao." "But Yueyao's hand isn't this hot," Yueyao said. Yueyao was a little disappointed when she heard that Jingyang was sick. She was bored in the hospital. She missed her daddy. Wuxia came once at night. But when he came, Yueyao had already taken her medicine and gone to bed early. He stayed at the hospital for a night and then went to work at dawn. At that time, Yueyao was still asleep. Hence, Yueyao missed Wuxia and wanted to go home as soon as she recovered. But she thought that she could play with Jingyang while she was sick in the hospital. She liked to play with Jingyang because she felt that Jingyang was very interesting. However, now that Jingyang had fallen ill, she was left all alone again. Yueyao's face was full of disappointment. Jingyang opened his eyes, then closed them weakly. He struggled to sit up, but after a few attempts, it was to no avail. He didn't even have the strength to sit up, much less play in the garden with Yueyao. How disappointing. All right, let's not disturb little brother. Let's just keep him company quietly, okay? Yueyao raised her head and suddenly thought of something. Yueyao wants to tell little brother a story. Yueyao ran back to the room with a 3D fairy tale book. 3D fairy tales. This fairy tales ins. It was a series of fairy tale storybooks developed by Leji Holdings. Li Hanlin gave Xianxia a set. Usually, a fairy tale would be divided into 3 volumes. Each volume was extremely heavy. Yueyao had a hard time carrying one. The book she carried over was Sleeping Beauty. Yueyao liked it very much. Almost every time before going to bed, she would let Xianxia read this book. She never got tired of it. Towards the end, she could almost memorize it herself. Children at this age were very passionate about things and stories that they loved. It was just like watching cartoons. They would watch them repeatedly. Xianxia was helpless. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But there was nothing she could do. Chapter 4498. Let me read it to you, okay? Jingyang nodded gently. He was already very happy to have her by his side. Yueyao climbed onto the bed and leaned closer to him. Then, he opened the book in front of him and flipped to the first page. A vivid 3-dimensional castle was displayed in front of him. Jing Yang had never seen such a gorgeous three-dimensional book before, and his gaze was slightly surprised. The castle had a pulling effect. He gently pushed and pulled a mechanism, and with the pushing and pulling effect, two paper figures appeared on the castle. They were the king and queen. This is the king and this is the queen. After Yueyao introduced them in a serious manner, he said tirelessly, "In the past, there was a king and queen who never had children. They were very sad and distressed because of this." Jing Yang interrupted curiously, "Why didn't they have children?" Yu Yao was stumped by this question. "Oh, I know." Jing Yang remembered that he had seen an advertisement before. Infertility. However, Yueyao had never heard of this unfamiliar word before. He looked at Yun Shishir in surprise. Yun Shishir almost burst out laughing. Jing Qi was very embarrassed at the sight. She secretly felt helpless about why her son had asked such an idiotic question. Yun Shishir asked with a red face, "How did he know about infertility?" "When he followed me to buy groceries, some people would post advertisements for gynecological hospitals. Moreover, on TV, there would also be advertisements for infertility. He can read a little." "He can read at such a young age." "I've taught him pinyin since he was young. He likes to read very much. When he has nothing to do, he will flip through the dictionary. He can read and write many words." "That's amazing." Yueyao suddenly tugged at Yun Shishir's sleeve. "Mommy, what's infertility?" Nothing. Yun Shishir quickly changed the topic and said to Jing Yang, "Let Sister Yueyao continue telling the story, okay?" Yueyao turned his head and turned another page of the fairy tale book. Two three-dimensional figures appeared by a river. Yueyao fiddled with a small mechanism, and a fish floated to the surface of the water. Jing Yang exclaimed in surprise. He was instantly energized. "Your wish will come true. You will give birth to a daughter soon," Yueyao said, and another night passed. In the room of the castle, the queen was holding a baby, and the king came to her side. After some time, the situation that the little fish predicted really came true. The queen really gave birth to a very beautiful daughter. The king was so happy that he could not put it down and decided to hold a big banquet. Yueyao flipped through the night, and suddenly, an evil witch appeared, bearing fangs and brandishing claws. Not only did he invite his relatives, friends, and foreign guests, but he also invited almost all the witches to send their kind wishes to his daughter. There were a total of 13 witches in his kingdom, and he only had 12 golden plates to entertain them, so he only invited 12 witches, leaving one uninvited. Jing Yang nodded when he heard that. Chapter 4499. When the 11th witch had just blessed her, the 13th witch, the one who wasn't invited, came in. She was very angry that she wasn't invited. She wanted to take revenge by offering her vicious spells. So when she came in, she shouted, "The king's daughter will be hurt by a spindle at the age of 15 and finally die." Jing Yang was dumbfounded when he heard that. No one had ever told him such a fairy tale since he was a child. In the Mu family, Yun Shishir had been continuing the tradition of bedtime stories. When Yueyao was very young, she was very happy to tell her some fairy tales. Yueyao and Yu were different. Yu didn't like to listen to fairy tales. She just listened to Yun Shishir's voice and fell asleep peacefully. But Yueyao really liked to listen to these fairy tales. Later on, Yu designed a series of 3D books for her. Yueyao loved these exquisite 3D books so much that she could not put them down. She listened to Sleeping Beauty no less than 10 times, but she didn't get tired of it. Jing Yang listened with relish, and from time to time, he asked some questions that made Yueyao feel helpless. Is there really such a witch in the world? Is the princess dead? Many questions always made Yueyao feel helpless. In the end, Yun Shishir personally came forward to answer. On the side, Jing Qi praised, "Little Yueyao's storytelling ability is too strong. Generally, children of this age are generally not clever." Yun Shishir smiled and said, "Yueyao doesn't speak very well. It's just that she has heard these stories too many times, so she can speak so fluently." Yueyao lay on the bed and turned a page of the book. A castle shrouded in darkness. In the gorgeous floor-to-ceiling window, there was the figure of the princess lying on the bed. When she was 15 years old, the past and the queen were not there. The princess was left alone in the palace. She walked around the palace, looking at all the big and small rooms. Finally, she came to an ancient palace. Inside the palace there was a narrow staircase, at the end of which was a door with a golden key. When she turned the golden key, the door sprang open and an old woman sat inside, busily spinning. When the princess saw her, she said, "Hello, Granny." "Spinning," replied the old woman, nodding her head. "What are you doing?" "Spinning," replied the old woman, nodding her head. "This little thing is really interesting when it spins." Then, the princess stepped forward and tried to pick up the spindle, but as soon as she touched it, she immediately fell to the ground and lost consciousness. The old spell really came true. Is the princess unconscious? Not only the princess, but all the people in the castle, including the horses and dogs, the tall people on the roof, the flies on the walls, and the rats in the holes, all fell asleep. The past and the queen have returned. Didn't a kind witch say that this dangerous spell would indeed come true, but the princess would be able to avert the danger? She won't die, she'll just fall asleep, and she'll sleep for 100 years. That's right. The entire castle is surrounded by hedges. Many princes came to explore, but they were all blocked by the hedges. Yueyao saw that Jing was engrossed in listening and felt smug. Chapter 4500. Yun Shirshir and Jing Qi watched the two little guys quietly. Yueyao was talking enthusiastically, and Jing was also fascinated. For a while, he didn't feel sleepy. After telling the story, Jing had already closed his eyes in a daze. After hearing that the princess was finally woken up by the prince's kiss, he also fell asleep peacefully. "It's just a fairy tale," Jing Qi lowered her voice and said, "Look, children are so easily satisfied. Even if it's a perfect ending in a fairy tale, he can sleep peacefully. The world of children is innocent and simple. They're easy to satisfy." As Yun Shirshir spoke, she picked up Yueyao and said to her, "It's time for you to take a nap." Yueyao rubbed her eyes. It was obvious that she was sleepy. She yawned loudly and let Yun Shirshir carry her to sleep. In the afternoon, Yu and Xiao Yichen finally rushed over. When they found out that Yueyao was sick, they rushed back without stopping for a moment. When they found out that Yueyao's fever was gradually subsiding, Yu and Xiao Yichen breathed a sigh of relief. The two of them guarded Yueyao on both sides. Looking at Yueyao's peaceful sleeping face, Yu felt especially sorry for her. "I feel that sister's face doesn't seem so rosy anymore. She has been injected with fever reducers for 2 days in a row. She has suffered a lot. Wouldn't it be too boring for Yueyao to stay in the hospital alone?" Yu said dejectedly, "I should have rushed back earlier, but I thought that as long as I came back before Yueyao's birthday, it would be fine. I didn't expect Yueyao to suddenly fall sick. The temperature difference during the change of seasons is huge, and she has the habit of kicking the quilt." Yun Shirshir paused for a moment before continuing. "However, Yueyao has been fine these few days in the hospital. She's not bored. There's a little brother around her age who's playing with her." "Little brother?" When Yu and Xiao Yichen heard this, they immediately became alert. Where did this little brother come from? Yun Shirshir was stunned. Can't be. These two fellows, were they even jealous of this kind of thing? That kid is just next door. Whoosh! Yu and Xiao Yichen disappeared into the next room at lightning speed. The door to the room was ajar. Jing Qi went to prepare the medicine. Yu and Xiao Yichen gently pushed the door open and saw a child with delicate features lying quietly on the bed with an 4 drip. His fever was too serious, and some of his tonsils were inflamed. He had to be put on a drip to reduce the inflammation. In order to find out who was trying to kidnap his sister, Yu slipped into the ward and saw a familiar name on the pathology report on the table. Jing Yang. It's him? Yu walked to the side of the bed and took a look. No wonder he felt that this child was very familiar, as if he had seen him somewhere before. Ah, it's him? Yu suddenly remembered. Xiao Yichen asked curiously, "You know him? Do you know who Gu Xingzi donated his cornea to? Could it be him?" "I remember that the child's name is Jing Yang. I've seen that child before and I remember his eyes." Although his facial features have changed a lot, his eyes haven't changed at all. Chapter 45:01. As soon as Yu finished speaking, Xiao Yichen could not help but flick him on the head. You still have the cheek to call others children? You're a child too, okay? How dare you use such an old-fashioned tone? Yu glared at him and bounced back. I'm older than him, okay? You're saying that he's the recipient of Uncle Xing's cornea? Yes. For some reason, Xiao Yichen was filled with emotions. This world is too small. I also heard that Uncle Xiangxia donated his cornea to a child. It's said that he has a congenital corneal defect. Initially, Yu and Xiao Yichen were filled with righteous indignation towards this brat who wanted to abduct their sister. However, when they found out that Jing Yang was the child who had received Gu Xing's cornea, they could not resist for a moment. For some reason, they believed that Gu Xingxia had not disappeared. Instead, he had always been there. However, through the cornea donation, his life had been extended, and Jing Yang was proof that he still existed. In the afternoon, Jing Yang finally woke up. Jing Qi sat beside him, but her expression was no longer as loving as before. Instead, it was surprisingly serious. You're awake? Jing Yang looked at her interrogative expression and felt a little uneasy. What's wrong? Answer Mom's question honestly. Yes. Did you sleep obediently by Mom's side last night? Jing Yang had never lied, and he did not like to lie. However, even if he did not lie about this matter, he could not admit that he did not sleep obediently by his mother's side. Jing Yang hugged the blanket and covered half of his face. He hummed guiltily. Mom doesn't like children who lie. Mom, I'm not lying. Then, a nurse told me that in the middle of the night, she stood on the balcony and saw you running around the back garden. Jing Yang was so scared that he burped. He had been discovered. And Jing Qi grabbed the wet hospital gown that Jing Yang had hidden in the bathroom and asked even more seriously, what's going on? Why is this gown so wet? There were a total of 2 sets of hospital gowns in the hospital. Early in the morning, Jing Qi planned to wash Jing Yang's hospital gown, but she couldn't find it. In the end, she found it in the corner of the bathroom, as if it had been deliberately hidden. Jing Yang felt even more guilty. He hid almost all of his face under the blanket, only revealing a pair of restless eyes. No one knows a child better than his mother. Jing Qi understood this child. He must have lied, but what was the purpose of lying? Also, why did he go jogging in the garden instead of sleeping well at night? Yang, answer me honestly. Where did you go last night? Did you catch a cold from playing in the garden last night? Jing Yang couldn't hide it any longer and could only nod silently. But Jing Qi was angry. Why don't you sleep obediently by Mommy's side? Because, Jing Yang pouted and said sadly, I want to be sick. I want to be hospitalized. Jing Qi was stunned. She had thought of countless answers, but she did not expect such an answer. Which child liked to be hospitalized, sick, and in the hospital? Chapter 45:02. Jing Yang lowered his head and gently moved his lips. He then confessed in a lonely manner, I want to play with little Yueyao. The nurse said that I'm about to recover and will be discharged today, but I don't want to. If I'm discharged, will I never be able to see her or play with her again? Jing Qi sighed helplessly. So it was because of this? So, this idiot didn't hesitate to get wet and run around the back garden in the cold wind in order to play with Yueyao. She remembered. Yesterday, the nurse had mentioned in front of him not to be cold and not to be exposed to the cold wind. This guy knew how to apply what he learned. Jing Qi asked tentatively, do you like Sister Yueyao so much? Jing Yang nodded excitedly. What do you like about her? She's so beautiful. Like a little princess. Jing Qi almost fell to the ground. So, it was because Yueyao was good-looking. Did her son look at faces like this? What else? She tells me fairy tales. But you can't get sick just to play with her. Jing Yang immediately lowered his head guiltily. Mum, I know I was wrong. I won't dare to do it again. Jing Qi patted his head, feeling sorry for him. Don't do such a stupid thing again. Besides, even if you're discharged from the hospital, you can still play with Sister Yueyao. Jing Yang's eyes widened in surprise. Really? Yes, when the time comes, Mom just needs to ask Yue Yao's mother for her contact information. When you're out of school and on vacation, Mom can take you to play with Sister Yue Yao. But before that, you have to recuperate. First, your fever has to go down. Jing Yang immediately obeyed and lay on the bed obediently like an obedient little angel. In the afternoon, Yue Yao woke up from her afternoon nap. As soon as she opened her eyes, she ignored her two older brothers and asked Xianxia to play with Jing Yang. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen were extremely hurt. This younger sister of his had completely ignored them. He didn't even notice their presence. Xianxia reminded her, Yue Yao, look who's back. It was only then that Yue Yao noticed Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen, who looked extremely disappointed. He was a little surprised. You guys are back. Idiot Yue Yao, did you just notice us? Yue Yao smiled, revealing her white teeth. She then turned around and asked Xianxia, Mommy, where's brother Yang Yang? Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen looked at each other. They were furious. They couldn't help but worry that when Yue Yao grew up and got a boyfriend, she would completely ignore her two older brothers. Xiao Yichen said, Yue Yao, can't you play with your older brother? Older brother isn't fun. Xiao Yichen was indignant. Which part of him isn't fun? Yue Yao pouted and didn't know what to say for a moment. Xianxia looked at the two little lads who were jealous of Jing Yang. For a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Yu Yu stretched out his arms and wanted to hug Yue Yao. Yue Yao, let's play together, okay? Raise me high. Yue Yao shook her head. I want to play with brother Jing Yang. Yu Yu smiled awkwardly and secretly blacklisted Jing Yang. Chapter 4503. Mom, is brother Yang Yang awake? I think so. He's probably on in 4 drip now. When Yue Yao heard this, she immediately lifted the blanket. Then I'll go play with him. Hey, wait. Xianxia called out to her and said reproachfully, don't run so fast. What if you fall? I know. Bring this orange to brother Yang Yang. Xianxia had inadvertently heard Jing Qi mention that Jing Yang especially liked to eat oranges. Yue Yao obediently took the orange and ran to the ward next door. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen looked at each other. They could see in each other's eyes the grievance of being neglected by their beloved little sister. You can't be alone with that rascal like your little sister. Xiao Yichen leaned over and muttered to Yu Yu, otherwise, what if little sister is kidnapped by that rascal? When Yu Yu heard this, she instantly became nervous. Her expression turned serious, but she also felt that it made sense. We can't let them be so close to each other and improve their relationship for nothing. Xiao Yichen added fuel to the fire by Yu Yu's ear. You have to know that many childhood sweethearts cultivate their relationship from a young age. Okay. Anyway, let's go over and watch over little sister. If that rascal dares to flirt with her, I'll definitely teach him a lesson. Xiao Yichen and Yu Yu instantly had a tacit understanding that they had a common enemy. It was as if they were brewing something big. Xianxia didn't know what the two little buns were mumbling to each other, but she saw that they looked nervous and alert. Before Xianxia could finish asking, Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen walked to the ward next door. Xianxia was speechless. Why did these two rascals look like they were going to catch adultery? When they arrived at the ward next door, Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen entered. They saw Yue Yao sitting by the bed with an orange in her hands. Jing Yang was leaning against the headboard with an 4 drip in his hand. I'll dial it for you. Yue Yao held up the orange and said proudly, I've seen how my mommy peels an orange. Yue Yao can do it too. When Yu Yao walked in, Jing Yang had just finished changing his 4 drip. She knew that he was still on in 4 drip and couldn't peel the orange. However, when she saw Jing Yang's greedy expression, she volunteered to peel the orange for him. When Xiao Yichen saw this, his nostrils flared. He had never eaten an orange peeled by his sister. Come on. Nothing. Even Yu Yu and Mommy had never enjoyed such special treatment from Hui Yao. How could Jing Yang have the upper hand? Xiao Yichen felt that his position in Hui Yao's heart was being threatened. He walked over and pouted as he said to Yue Yao, I want to eat an orange too. Yueyao and Jing Yang were looking at each other, sweetly, when Xiao Yichen appeared at the wrong time. Yueyao then realized that Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen were also in the ward. She asked in a childish voice, "Why are you here?" "We knew you were sick, so we rushed back. But when you saw us, you ignored us." Yueyao imitated Xianxia's tone and lectured them, "You're already so old. Do you still need me to play with you? Seriously?" Jing Yang found Yueyao's tone amusing and couldn't help but laugh. Xiao Yichen's eyes were almost spitting fire. "What are you laughing at?" Chapter 4504. Jing Yang immediately stopped smiling. Yu Yu stared blankly at the orange in Yueyao's hand. She pouted and said coquettishly, "Yueyao, why aren't you peeling the orange for Big Brother?" "I'll peel the orange first." Yueyao's little hand gently rubbed the orange until the peel loosened. Then, she gently dug her index finger into the center of the orange and carefully peeled the peel. She peeled the orange very carefully. Her fair and adorable fingers peeled off the peel bit by bit. As the orange had been rubbed properly, it was very thin. When she finished peeling the orange, Yueyao was surprisingly patient. Bit by bit, she peeled off the white peel on the fruit pouch. The white peel was edible, but it affected the texture slightly. Every time Xianxia peeled an orange for Yueyao, she would peel off the white peel bit by bit. This made the texture even sweeter and more perfect. Yueyao imitated Xianxia's actions and slowly tore off the white fruit along the lines. However, this process was extremely long. Moreover, Yueyao's fingers weren't very nimble. She peeled and paused for a while. Before they knew it, 5 minutes had passed and she had only peeled off half of the peel. If it had been any other time, Xiao Yichen would have lost his patience. However, since the person peeling the orange was Yueyao, he was happy to be patient. Yu Yu, Jing Yang, and Xiao Yichen stared fixedly at Yueyao as she peeled the peel. It was as though just watching her peel the white peel was exceptionally interesting. Finally, "I'm done peeling." Yueyao proudly waved the peeled orange in front of the three of them. "Look, I'm done peeling it." Xiao Yichen and Yu Yu stretched out their hands at almost the same time. However, Yueyao quickly retracted her hands. "This orange isn't for you guys." Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen's fragile hearts were about to shatter when they heard this. "If it's not for us, then who is it for?" Mommy said that Big Brother Yang likes to eat oranges. As Yueyao spoke, she peeled the orange in half and prepared to divide it into pieces for Jing Yang to eat. Jing Yang's hand was on an foredrip, so Yueyao was about to feed him. This was a special treatment that Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen could only wish for. Xiao Yichen panicked and began to whine. "Yueyao, I want some too. Why aren't you giving it to Big Brother?" Yu Yu could not care less about being reserved. This was the first orange Yueyao had peeled in her life. It had an incomparably special meaning. It was as if this was not an ordinary orange, but a century-old longevity fruit. It was as if eating this longevity fruit would make one immortal. However, Yueyao couldn't bear to give it to them. Instead, she passed the fruit to Jing Yang. However, Jing Yang didn't dare to reach out to take it. This was because Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen, the two siscons, were staring at him covetously. It was as if the two of them would pounce on him if he reached out to take it. Jing Yang swallowed awkwardly and said quietly, "Why don't we have a competition? Whoever wins gets to eat the orange peeled by Yueyao. What do you think?" Xiao Yichen immediately perked up when she heard that Jing Yang wanted to play a game with them. "Tell me what game?" "I don't want to play if it's too easy." Jing Yang said, "How about playing one-halves?" When Yu Yu heard this, she didn't think much of it. Tisk, childish. Chapter 4505. Are you scared? You don't dare to compete with me? Jing Yang said proudly, "I'm very good at playing wooden dummies." "Are you trying to provoke me?" Yu Yu raised her eyebrows. "I won't fall for it. If you don't accept the challenge, then you're giving up." Jing Yang pretended to take the tangerine. "Then this tangerine is mine." "Wait." Xiao Yichen was anxious. "Isn't it just a game of wooden dummies? Let's compete. I'm not afraid of you." "Sure." Jing Yang sat up calmly. "Come on, who wants to compete with me first?" "Me." Xiao Yichen's desire to win was aroused. He sat down on the bed. 3, 3, 4, 4. We're both wooden dummies. Don't talk and don't move. As soon as he finished speaking, Jing-yang and Xiao Yichen looked at each other motionlessly as if they had been petrified. Xiao Yichen was known for his impatience. Although he was able to keep his composure at first, after a minute, his eyes suddenly became very sore and he only dared to blink gently. Yu Yu's mouth twitched when she saw the two of them looking at such a boring game so seriously. They were playing so seriously. Moreover, when they said they couldn't move, they really couldn't move at all. This game was very simple in the beginning. As long as they didn't move, there would be no problem. However, once they sat for a long time, their necks would become sore, their shoulders would swell, and their bodies would itch terribly. Especially when the wind blew in through the window, it didn't feel very cold through the thin layer of clothes. However, Xiao Yichen could clearly feel the wind blowing into his eyes. It was itchy, dry, and teary. He wanted to rub his eyes, but if he did, it would be obvious that he was the one who moved first. He would lose. Hence, he deliberately widened his eyes until they turned red. He gritted his teeth and persisted until he was unwilling to give up. On the other hand, this game of wooden dummies was very easy for Jing-yang. It was his best game. He had been born with a cornea defect since he was a child. This meant that he had been immersed in darkness for a long time as a baby. Babies also had curiosity. Being trapped in the darkness for a long time, they would also be curious about the outside world. However, due to the prolonged darkness, he had to keep his eyes open for a long time. Even if he didn't blink, he wouldn't feel any discomfort. Jing-yang had never lost to anyone in this game of wooden dummies. Xiao Yichen was no exception. 10 minutes later, Xiao Yichen finally couldn't hold it in any longer. He blinked his eyes. Initially, he wanted to pretend that he didn't blink, but Jing-yang found out. I saw it. You blinked. Xiao Yichen rubbed his eyes awkwardly. This guy's eyes were really sharp. He had blinked so quickly, but he had been discovered. So boring. Even though Xiao Yichen was unwilling to admit defeat, he had no choice but to admit defeat. He and Jing-yang had been glaring at each other for a long time. Their eyes were bloodshot, so much so that they looked extremely red. Yu, compare yourself to him. Xiao Yichen was still annoyed. If I had persisted just now, I wouldn't have lost. I can't let him get away with this. When Yu heard this, he sat on the bed in disdain and faced Jing-yang. I'll compete with you. Jing-yang smiled. It didn't matter who competed with him. Chapter 45:06. Initially, he had thought that this game was extremely boring. However, for the sake of the orange peeled by Yueyao, Jing-yang was willing to do anything. 3, 3, 4, 4, 4 were all blockheads. Don't talk and don't move. Yu and Jing-yang did not move an inch after that. Xiao Yichen considerately closed the window. If the window had not been open, he would not have lost so badly. At that time, he wanted to remind Yu to close the window. However, he could not move his mouth or speak. He hinted many times, but Yu did not even notice him. Hence, he gave up. However, since Yu was going to compete with Jing-yang, he had to close the window to prevent the same thing from happening. After the window was closed, the ward suddenly became quiet and there was no more wind. Jing-yang calmly opened his eyes and stared at Yu without moving. Xiao Yichen suddenly thought of playing tricks. He sneaked behind Yu and rubbed his nose. He made funny faces and racked his brains to make Jing-yang laugh. However, Jing-yang did not even look at him. Did he have no presence at all? Xiao Yichen stuck out his tongue. However, no matter how he tried to provoke him or make him laugh, Jing-yang did not react. He only stared at Yu silently. The two of them stared at each other for more than 10 minutes. Oh God! For more than 10 minutes, he did not move at all. Xiao Yichen thought that it would be over in 3 minutes at most. He was such a restless person. Making him sit in the same place without moving was undoubtedly a torturous torture. However, it was not a problem for Jing-yang at all. It seemed that he had underestimated this kid called Jing-yang. He stared at Yu without moving an inch. Just like that, another half an hour passed. Xiao Yichen did not know how many times he had yawned. Yueyao looked at Jing-yang and then at Yu. He also felt bored. Don't compete anymore. Jing-yang and Yu did not reply. They were still holding their breaths. Xianxia came back with hot water and saw the two children sitting face to face, motionless like statues. She felt strange. When she saw that Jing Yang's infusion bottle had been hung up, she rushed over and rang the bell. The nurse rushed over. As soon as the nurse entered the room, she was also confused by this scene. What's wrong with the two children? Xianxia was also stunned. I don't know what happened either. When I came back with hot water, I saw the two of them sitting facing each other without saying anything. Sure. Xiao Yichen reminded Xianxia not to speak. They're playing games. What game? 123 blockhead, whoever moves or speaks will lose. Wooden man. Xianxia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why are these two kids playing such a boring game? Xiao Yichen explained, whoever wins will be able to eat Yueyao peeled oranges and enjoy the treatment of a national guest. This was not an exaggeration at all. Whether it was Xiao Yichen or Yueyao's first personally peeled oranges in his life was simply a luxurious national guest treatment. Otherwise, Yu, who had always been mature and steady, would not be willing to play this game with Jing Yang. He was very serious. This game was too childish for him. However, for the sake of Yueyao's oranges, he did not care about his reputation. Another 10 minutes passed. Chapter 4507. Another 10 minutes passed. Yu's eyes were visibly redder and he didn't dare to blink. Jing Yang wasn't any better. He stared and somehow became cross-eyed. Jing Yang didn't notice it, but Xiao Yichen wanted to laugh when he saw it. However, he was afraid that his laughter would affect Yu's performance. After all, laughter was contagious. Hence, Xiao Yichen tried his best not to laugh. However, even though he could control himself, Yu might not be able to do the same. He and Jing Yang were sitting opposite each other. Hence, he could see Jing Yang's adorable cross-eyed expression. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He really wanted to laugh. However, he couldn't control himself anymore. Yu tried his best to control himself. Xianxia rushed over. When she saw this scene, she couldn't help but walk over and scratch the soles of their feet. Wahaha! Ha! The two little guys couldn't control themselves and were already on the verge of breaking down. Now that Xianxia had scratched the soles of their feet, they couldn't control themselves anymore. Mommy! Yu regained his serious expression and turned to look at her angrily. Why are you scratching the soles of my feet? Stupid teammate! When did I become your teammate? Xianxia didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she said, when I walked in, I saw the two of you staring at each other. Jing Yang's eyes were almost cross-eyed. Jing Yang and Yu asked in unison, who's the big-eyed one and who's the small-eyed one? At this moment, the two of them seemed to have a tacit understanding. Yu said in disdain, of course I'm the big-eyed one. Your eyes aren't as big as mine. But my eyes are definitely not small either. Anyway, my mommy said that I'm the big-eyed one and you're the small-eyed one. Yu, who had always been cold and aloof, was angered by Jing Yang and argued with him like a childish child. At the side, Xianxia suddenly felt a sense of helplessness. They could even argue over such a childish question as who was the bigger eye and who was the smaller eye? Wasn't this a little too exaggerated? Yueyao held the peeled orange and was dumbfounded. When Yu saw this, he immediately walked over. His arrogant attitude towards Jing Yang was gone. Instead, he gently squeezed her little paws. Yueyao, can you give the orange in your hand to Big Brother to eat? Yueyao recovered and looked at Yu before looking at Jing Yang. Then she said softly, no. Not good. Not good. Not good. Yu's handsome face twisted. It was as if he had been frozen. Yueyao carried the orange and walked to Jing Yang's side. She smiled at Jing Yang and said, this orange was originally for Big Brother Jing Yang. This orange was originally for Big Brother Jing Yang. This orange was originally for Big Brother Jing Yang. This sentence kept echoing in Yu's ears. Jing Yang took the orange in a daze. He broke it in half and gave one half to Yueyao. The two of them looked at each other and smiled warmly. Yu half knelt on the ground as if he had been struck by lightning. He supported himself with both hands as if he had suffered a great blow. Xiao Yichen didn't know why, but when he saw Yu breaking down, he wanted to laugh. Chapter 45:08. He walked over, knelt on one knee, and patted his shoulder gently. It's just a tangerine. Do you have to be so dramatic? A tangerine? Yu suddenly clenched his fists and stood up. He said angrily, "Is this just a tangerine's problem?" Xianxia was speechless. What other problems could there be? This is a matter of status, dumb it. Yu turned his head and looked at the two people who were having a good time. Jingyang and Yueyao were eating tangerines, laughing as they fed each other. That scene stung a certain someone's eyes. I'm going crazy. At night, Wuxia arrived at the ward. The first thing he saw was not Yueyao, who was sitting on the bed reading a comic book. Instead, he saw Yu sitting on the sofa in the corner. The reason why he noticed him at first glance was because he could feel the endless resentment coming from him the moment he entered the room. Yu crossed his arms and leaned against the sofa. He looked out of the window as though he had been petrified. Who was the one who was sick? Wuxia pointed at Yu and looked at Xianxia. He asked in surprise, "What's wrong with him? Is he sick?" "He seems fine." Xianxia said helplessly, "Your son is fine. He's not sick." "Then why does he look so gloomy?" Xianxia touched her nose and waved at him as though she wanted to whisper something to him. Wuxia leaned over curiously. "He's obviously jealous." "Jealous?" Wuxia was confused. "Who is he jealous of?" "Yueyao." Xianxia told him everything that happened in the afternoon. Wuxia's lips twitched when he heard this. "It's just a tangerine. Why is this guy so useless?" But the first time Yueyao peeled an orange, he personally asked her for one. In the end, Yueyao didn't give it to him and gave it to Jingyang. Yu was obviously jealous. Wuxia looked at his son with disdain. "That's his sister, not his wife." "Sister complex," Xianxia said calmly. As a father, how could he not know that his son is a sister complex? You know that Yu loves Yueyao the most, and Yueyao has always had a special place in Yu's heart. Yueyao also loves Yu the most. But, ever since Jingyang appeared, it seems like Yu's position in Yueyao's heart has changed. How is this possible? Wuxia didn't think much of it. He's thinking too much. That's what I told him, but he refused to listen. Since this afternoon, he has been curled up in a corner. He's been in a bad mood. What about Yueyao? Yueyao said that she wants to read more fairy tales. Then she'll tell Jingyang stories. Wuxia's lips twitched again. No wonder Yu was in such a bad mood. Yueyao was really good to Jingyang. Even he found it a little strange. Oh yes, be careful. Try not to let Yu and Xianxia catch a cold. Xianxia regained her composure. What's wrong? Chapter 45:09. Quarantine. Xianxia suddenly became nervous. Is it that serious? Then what about Yueyao? Will Yueyao catch the flu? It is said that there are a few suspected cases in this hospital. Of course, this is internal news. The Ministry of Health does not dare to make a big deal out of it. They are still analyzing the degree of contagion for fear of causing panic among the public. Of course, regardless of whether it is true or not, don't go anywhere other than the ward. Oh, I understand. Xianxia nodded. For the past 2 days, Yueyao had been very obedient. Initially, she wanted to go to the back garden with Jingyang to play. However, because she was worried about the flu, she asked Yueyao and Jingyang not to go anywhere outside the ward. Yueyao read a lot of fairy tales at night. Although she was still young, she had already started to learn how to read. Moreover, the comic books had pinyin, so she learned a lot of new stories and told them to Jingyang. Yu became even more depressed these days and fell ill. It was not because she was too sad that she fell ill, but because she caught a cold. Xianxia became alert and asked the doctor about the cause. Because it was sudden, the doctor was not sure. Hence, he took a blood sample and said that the results would only be out in 2 or 3 days. In these 2 or 3 days, Xianxia also fell ill. In addition, another child that Xianxia did not expect was also sent to the hospital. It's you? Xianxia stood in the corridor and looked at Chuho, who was holding a hot water bottle. She was so shocked that she could not speak. Chuho was also a little surprised to see her. Why are you here? Xianxia frowned and said, "The 3 children are sick. They caught a cold and are hospitalized now." Chu Ho immediately became nervous when he heard this. The 3 children are sick? They all caught a cold? Xianxia asked again, "What about you?" Xiaobao caught a cold and was hospitalized. The doctor said that he might have contracted a new type of influenza and is now in a semi-isolated state. So serious? Haven't you noticed that many children are inexplicably hospitalized with a cold? The 4 major children's hospitals in Beijing were all overcrowded, and there was a shortage of beds. It's a change of season, and the weather has been fluctuating between hot and cold recently. When Xiaobao caught a cold at first, I didn't take it to heart and kept asking the family doctor to give him injections and medicine. But after a week, he suddenly had a fever. I was really worried, so I wanted to send him to an authoritative hospital. Unexpectedly, the doctor said that he might have contracted a new type of influenza. I heard that there are already deaths in another children's hospital. Death cases? Xianxia was shocked. She had been following the news, but she had never heard of any deaths. Why haven't I heard about it? I'm quite concerned about this matter. It's the news from this morning. There will probably be a report tonight. Chu Ho asked with concern, "Are the 3 little guys okay?" "We've already taken a blood sample and submitted it for testing. Because the hospital has been overcrowded recently, many doctors have been temporarily transferred to other hospitals. The test results will probably only be available in a few days. So we can't be sure if they have contracted the influenza." Chapter 45:10. Fortunately, Xianxia and Ruerwei have not had much contact with Xiaobao. Otherwise, the doctor said that such a young child would not be able to withstand the influenza virus. His life might be in danger. Xianxia felt a lingering fear when she heard this. It was not that she did not notice it, but who would have thought that a new type of influenza virus would suddenly appear? She also noticed that there were a lot of children hospitalized recently. Moreover, the symptoms were surprisingly similar. They all started with a simple cold, followed by a high fever that did not subside. It would always recur. It would clearly subside, but the fever would return. No one thought that it was the flu. Lin Shi always slept in the same room as Xiaobao, but Xianxia and Ruerwei slept in another room. However, Chu Ho was still very nervous. He asked an authoritative doctor to take a look at him personally. After the doctor confirmed that there was no problem, Chu Ho was relieved. However, Xiaobao is already in a state of semi-quarantine. It seems that the new type of influenza is real. We'll just have to wait for the announcement. Semi-quarantine? Xianxia could not help but be curious. What do you mean by semi-quarantine? There can only be one parent watching over him. Because Xianxia and Ruerwei are at home, he is worried, so he volunteered to stay and take care of Xiaobao. Xianxia returned to the ward, feeling a little uneasy. The ward was very big. There were a total of 4 beds. Xianxia originally wanted to let Yueyao stay in the VIP ward, but it was said that the VIP ward was already booked. Since he was already in it, it was impossible to chase him out. Therefore, Xianxia let Yueyao stay in a slightly more ordinary ward. In the end, all 3 of the 4 beds collapsed. Yu was fine. However, even Xiaoyichen could not withstand it. It was enough to show how fierce this new type of childhood influenza was. Soon the test results were out. Yu was suffering from a new type of childhood influenza, so she had to be quarantined as soon as possible. All the children who were in contact with Yu had to be quarantined as well. This meant that Yueyao, Xiaoyichen, Yu, and Jingyang would all be sent to the isolation ward. Furthermore, only one parent was allowed to accompany the child. Xianxia was a little dumbfounded when she heard the results. The doctor and nurse hurried over and took Yueyao and Xiaoyichen's blood samples, saying that they needed to conduct further tests. Jingyang naturally couldn't escape either. He only had a common cold, but because Yueyao and Yu were also implicated, Xianxia could not help but feel guilty. She repeatedly apologized to Jingqi. Although Jingqi was worried, she didn't say anything. If it's really a new type of childhood flu, it's inevitable even if you leave the hospital. It's actually a good thing to be able to diagnose it as soon as possible. In short, Let's just wait and see. Okay. The next morning, the doctor and nurse walked over and sent the 3 children to the isolation area. When she entered the isolation area, Xianxia had to wear the special isolation suit provided by the hospital. She wore a blue level 2 isolation suit, a mask, and even transparent protective goggles. Xianxia felt uncomfortable wearing this kind of isolation suit. She put on the isolation suit and walked into the isolation area. She happened to see an extremely tall man standing in front of her. Xianxia recognized his astonishing aura at a glance. This man was Gu Jinglian. She walked over and took a look. Gu Jinglian also turned around and was a little surprised to see her. Chapter 45:11. Gu Jinglian said, "Xiao Bao and Yue Yao are in the same ward. Do you know that?" Xianxia said, "I don't know. I only know that the 3 children have been arranged to stay in the same quarantine area. I asked the hospital to arrange it that way." Gu Jinglian paused for a moment before he continued, "The ward is already crowded. There are 6 beds in one ward, so it's just right for the 5 children. They can also take care of each other." 6 beds? Is it really that crowded? The ward is not small. Even if there are 6 beds, it won't seem crowded. Although it was called a quarantine area, it was not as exaggerated as being completely isolated. It was far from being fully armed. Before Gu Jinglian and Xianxia entered the ward, they heard Xiao Bao's voice from afar. Just right, 19 points. Come, pay up. WeChat and Alipay are both accepted." Gu Jinglian frowned deeply. He exchanged glances with Xianxia and seemed to have understood something. He quickly walked into the room and saw a few children surrounding a table. The children were all wearing masks, but it could not hide their fierce aura. Yu, Xiaoyichen, and Xiao Bao sat at the table while Jing Yang watched from the side. Yue Yao stood next to Jing Yang. She was wearing a mask. Although she did not understand what was going on, she opened her eyes wide and watched curiously. Xiao Bao, Yu, and Xiaoyichen were gambling. "You're so proud of 19 points? Yu flipped the cards in her hand and snorted coldly. "Did I say anything when I got 21 points?" Xiao Bao heard this and immediately leaned over to look at the cards in Yu's hand in disbelief. 10-9. It was exactly 21 points. This game was played by 2 to 6 people. Apart from the Joker, there were 52 cards. The goal of the players was to make the total points of the cards in their hand not exceed 21 points and try to make it as big as possible. Once the number exceeded 21, it would be considered a win. If it did not exceed 21 points, then the person closest to 21 points would be the winner. This was a very classic gambling game. Gu Jinglian had taught Xiao Bao how to play this game. After entering the hospital, Xiao Bao secretly took out the poker cards he had hidden in the hospital to play. Because of Gu's instructions, the children were all assigned to the same ward. The relationship between the Gu family and the Mu family had eased over the past few years. Occasionally, they would visit each other and meet each other at gatherings. The children were already very familiar with each other, so they did not feel awkward and did not feel awkward being in the same ward. After entering the ward, she had to stay in the ward all day and couldn't walk around. Other than eating and sleeping, she could only watch boring TV programs. Because the semi-quarantine area was filled with children, Peppa Pig was playing on a loop on the TV. At first, he watched with great interest. But after a long time, they inevitably felt bored. Hence, Xiao Bao suggested that they play 21 points and asked if anyone wanted to participate. Yu and Xiaoyichen ignored him at first. Then Xiao Bao started to mock them. "I'm not targeting anyone. Forgive me for being blunt, but everyone here is trash." It would have been better if he did not provoke them. After he mocked them, Yu and Xiaoyichen immediately sat down at the card table. Xiao Bao came to the hospital with tens of thousands of yuan. Yu and Xiaoyichen were not short of money. Hence, after they agreed on the end of the game, the children gathered in the hospital to gamble. Chapter 45:12. What surprised Yu was that he had thought that Xiao Bao was only good at martial arts. He did not expect Xiao Bao to be so good at blackjack. After a few rounds, there were wins and losses. Yu did not have much of an advantage over Xiao Bao. However, since Xiao Bao had made his threat, Yu Yu would definitely not admit defeat. Yu Yu had never played blackjack before, but he understood it after Xiao Bao explained it once. Xiao Bao relied on his experience, while Yu Yu relied on his IQ. Yu Yu was very smart and learned everything quickly. Blackjack was not difficult. It required 80% luck and 20% courage. The most important thing was to dare to go all out. In the beginning, Xiao Bao was quite pleased with himself when he got a small advantage from Yu Yu. However, in the third and fourth round, Yu Yu's luck got better. In addition, he was more familiar with the rules. Xiao Bao lost 4 rounds in a row. Ouch! Xiao Bao collapsed on the table and started to lose his temper. How is that possible? You got exactly 21 points in 2 rounds. Do you know how to cheat? Xianxia, you have to admit defeat. Yu did not care if he admitted defeat or not. He was the one who suggested blackjack, and he was also the one who questioned him about cheating. You cheated? The winner cheated? What kind of logic is that? Also, I can't afford to lose a few thousand yuan. Do you want to cheat? Yu Yu had a sharp tongue. Xiao Bao would not gain anything from arguing with him. Gu Jinglian and Xianxia stood at the door. Their eyelids were twitching violently. Yu Yu had just shuffled the cards when he saw Xianxia and Gu Jinglian standing at the door. He was so frightened that he threw the cards away. Mommy! He completely ignored Gu Jinglian, who was beside him. Gu Jinglian was also used to his disregard. When Xiao Bao saw Yu Yu's reaction, he turned around in confusion. However, Gu Jinglian had already walked up to him and grabbed his ear. Daddy! You're still calling me Dad. I don't have a son like you. Wu, who are you trying to embarrass by losing to someone in blackjack? Xianxia was completely speechless. She originally thought that Gu Jinglian had walked over aggressively to teach Xiao Bao a lesson about gambling. But in the end, it was because of this. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't find anything wrong with it. After all, Gu Jinglian had been immersed in gambling since he was young. He could not be too casual about gambling. As his son, playing cards was indeed not a big deal, but he lost too badly. Xiao Bao said pitifully, "What? I didn't want to lose to him. He had good luck, so how can you blame me?" Luck is also a part of one's ability. Xiao Bao started to sell his father out. If you're so good, why don't you play around with Yu Yu? If you can beat Yu Yu, it's not too late to say such sarcastic words. I think you definitely can't beat Yu Yu. His luck is too good. Had he ever seen such a son? Pushing his own father into a fire pit? Asking him to play blackjack with a 10-year-old kid? Whether he won or lost, it wouldn't look good. If he won, it would only be seen as an adult bullying a child. If he lost, it would be even more embarrassing. However, if he didn't play with Yu Yu, it would look like he had a guilty conscience. Gu Jinglian gritted his teeth in hatred. How could he have such a stupid son? Seeing this, Yu Yu also started to put up a banner. Gu Jinglian, if you feel indignant on behalf of Xianxia, why don't you play with me too? Chapter 45:13. Gu Jinglian glared at him coldly. Yu Yu, on the other hand, was not afraid of the tiger. He glared back fiercely. Come on, let's decide the winner in 1 round. I'm not playing with you. You're guilty. You're scared. Get your father to play with me. My father needs to go to work. He needs to work. Who would be like you? Gu Jinglian was so angry that his face turned ashen. He had actually been bullied by Yu Yu, this little B** starred. Moreover, he had been ridiculed to the point where he could not retaliate. Xianxia quickly came over to smooth things over. You don't mess around. I'm not messing around. You're not allowed to provoke Uncle Gu. Okay. Yu Yu listened obediently, but secretly gave Gu Jinglian a thumbs up. When Gu Jinglian saw this, he gritted his teeth even harder. He turned around and looked at Xianxia. Where's Wuxia? He asked. He's at the office. What's he doing at the office? He's at work. Come here. Gu Jinglian was obviously serious. Tell him that his son provoked me. Why did it feel like Gu Jinglian was complaining? Half an hour later, Wuxia arrived. He had originally planned to rush over after dealing with the company's affairs. Although only one guardian could enter the quarantine area, his 3 children were in the hospital and he was worried about being alone at home. Just then, Gu Jinglian called and said that there was something urgent. He thought that something earth-shattering had happened and hurried over. However, when he entered the ward, he saw Gu Jinglian sitting at the table with a deck of poker cards in front of him. Mu Yazhe was stunned. What was going on? When Yu saw him, she immediately ran over and said to him, "Daddy, Gu Jinglian wants to play blackjack with you. You have to work harder. You can't lose, okay?" His son's skills were not as good as mine, so he lost to me. I asked him to play with me, but he said that he would not lower himself to the same level as a child, and that it would only count if he played with you. Mu Yazhe looked at Gu Jinglian speechlessly. "Are you a child? So childish?" Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. "Sit." Mu Yazhe sat down in front of the table. Gu Jinglian immediately dealt the cards, 1 open card and 2 hidden cards. 1 round to decide the winner. Mu Yazhe frowned. "You want to play blackjack with me? What is it?" "I won't." Mu Yazhe said, "I rarely play cards." Gu Jinglian said, "Your son knows how to play blackjack, and you're telling me you don't? Who are you lying to?" Mu Yazhe said innocently, "I really don't know how to play. Do you think I'm you?" Gu Jinglian was speechless. He deeply suspected that Mu Yazhe was pretending to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. How could he not have come into contact with blackjack? "Then what do you know?" Mu Yazhe said, "If it's 2 people, I'll play catfishing." "Catfishing?" Yu leaned over curiously. "Daddy, you really don't know how to play?" Mu Yazhe lowered his voice. "I've played before, but I forgot the rules." "You're such a scammer. Who would be happy to play blackjack with him? Who is he? He grew up in the casino. You can't afford to offend him." The president of Xianxia Financial Group was actually scared. Yu despised him. "Daddy, you're such a coward." Mu Yazhe didn't think much of it. So be it. Daddy doesn't earn money to gamble. It's to support the 3 of you." These words were very pleasing to Yu's ears. Why was his daddy so virtuous? Chapter 45:14. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. "Are you a sore loser?" "That depends on what you're betting on." Mu Yazhe suddenly leaned closer and said meaningfully, "If you want to bet, why don't you bet on something big? I'm quite interested in the Gu family mansion. Why don't you use the Gu family mansion as your capital?" Gu Jinglian's gaze sharpened. This Mu Yazhe was quite good at speaking without thinking. The Gu family mansion? Every inch of that land was worth a fortune. It had been preserved for hundreds of years, and every brick was worth a fortune. Even the Cultural Relics Bureau had estimated the price of the carvings on the eaves. This piece of land was worth half of the Gu Corporation's shares. It was a mansion that was more expensive than a courtyard house in the capital. But you can't bear to part with it? Are you feeling guilty? Mu Yazhe mocked expressionlessly. It seems that President Gu is not so sure about winning. His provocation was only because he had set his sights on the Gu family's main residence. If Gu Jinglian was willing to take out the Gu family's residence as a bet, Mu Yazhe would really be willing to follow the bet and give it his all. Get lost. Ha! Yun Shirshir was speechless. Why are the 2 of you acting like children? So childish. Mu Yazhe complained to his wife innocently, "Madam, he provoked me first." Even in front of Gu Jinglian, Mu Yazhe showed his true colors of a henpecked husband. Gu Jinglian said coldly, "It seems that President Mu is also a henpecked husband. He's usually swift and decisive in business, but in private he's actually so afraid of his wife." Mu Yazhe raised his eyebrows and glanced at him. "Oh, so you're saying that President Gu has a high status in the family?" Gu Jinglian's lips twitched and he said indignantly, "I have the highest status in the family." "Dad, you're lying." Xiao Bao, who was at the side, mercilessly exposed a certain someone. "At home, Daddy clearly listens to Mommy." Puha! The group of kids fell on the bed laughing. Gu Jinglian's face could not be any darker. Yu teased Gu Jinglian even more. "Oh my God! Gu Jinglian, the dignified Gu Jinglian, has actually become a slave to his wife. I also heard that Auntie Chu Ho's status in the Gu family seems to be higher?" "Of course." Xiao Bao said proudly, No matter how big or small the family is, Mom makes more decisions. Dad wanted to fight for his position at first, but he failed in the end. Gu Jinglian couldn't take it anymore and punched him mercilessly. Sometimes she really wanted to slap Xiaobao to the wall, the kind that couldn't be pulled down. How could he trick his own father like that? Ever since he was young, he didn't have any other skills, but his ability to tear him down was not small. Xiaobao hid behind Xianxia and pointed at Gu Jinglian as he complained, "Dad, you're using domestic violence. I'm going to become an idiot because of you." "It's best if you become an idiot. Dad will take care of you for the rest of your life." It was better to be an idiot than to have such a ridiculous setting. Xianxia tried so hard to hold back her laughter that her stomach hurt. However, she really couldn't tell that Gu Jinglian had such a low status in the family. This didn't seem like his style of doing things. Beside them, Jing Yang said quietly, "Why do I feel that our ward is different from the other wards?" The group looked at him and asked, "What do you mean?" "This morning, I heard someone crying in the ward next door. I feel that many wards in the quarantine area are lifeless, but our ward is a little special." Chapter 45:15. Rather than saying that it was special, it was more like the flu wasn't a big deal at all. This was a flu that could kill people. When Jing Qi found out that he was going to enter the quarantine zone, she hugged Jing Yang and cried once. After arriving at the quarantine zone, Jing Yang was originally depressed. However, when he met Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen, this pair of clowns, he couldn't be depressed even if he wanted to. Xiao Yichen lay on the hospital bed in a daze and said disapprovingly, "What's the big deal about a flu virus? I've seen all kinds of things and I've gone through life and death with you several times. It's just a flu virus." Everyone looked at him. However, Xiao Yichen's retribution soon came. The next day, Xiao Yichen's condition took a turn for the worse. His high fever didn't subside. He had a strong constitution since he was young and rarely fell sick. However, his fever suddenly rose to 39.8 degrees Celsius. Xianxia and Wuxia only went back at night. When they came back the next day, Xiao Yichen was lying limply on the bed and couldn't move at all. He had paid the price for his big words yesterday. For some reason, Yu looked at Xiao Yichen, who was lying limply on the bed with his eyes half closed and a thermometer in his mouth. It was clearly a very serious matter, but she felt like laughing. Did Xiao Yichen's words yesterday count as setting a flag? In the morning, the news broadcast on the television reported a few cases of illness. There was a death in the hospital affiliated to Southwest University of China. Furthermore, the flu virus this time had already spread around the world. The World Health Organization had already named the flu virus shaman. According to research, it should have originated from a person who ate sick pork that died from the coronavirus and had a high fever that didn't subside, leading to pneumonia. The virus was spread through the air. However, the virus had to pass through many levels of immune protection in the body. Adult immunity was stronger, but children's immunity was weaker. Therefore, the flu this time was more common among children. The flu virus would stay in the body for a period of time. Simply put, if the person didn't survive the high fever and subsequently develop pneumonia, it would be fatal. If they survived the fever and didn't have any major problems after a period of observation, they would have a preliminary immunity to the virus and would not be infected again. However, Xiao Yichen's sudden collapse caught everyone off guard. Xiao Yichen had a good physique. Wuxia had said that he rarely fell sick when he was young and rarely caught a cold. He had been in good health since he was young. No one had expected him to fall sick all of a sudden. The doctor explained that whether it was a child or an adult, it was not a good thing to be sick often or not. They often fell sick because their bodies were weak, but if they didn't fall sick for a long time, the body's antibodies would become less and less. When a serious illness came, it would be difficult to resist. This was because the body would produce antibodies to the virus after recovering from the illness. The next time the illness occurred, it wouldn't be so serious. If the body had minor illnesses frequently, the body would produce more antibodies, and the ability to resist the disease would be strengthened. Catching a cold was a detoxification process. Xiao Yichen rarely fell sick. Therefore, when the flu came aggressively, his body lacked the antibodies to resist it, and he collapsed immediately. Other than him, Yueyao and Jing Yang's conditions improved a lot. Xiao Bao and Yu were still in the same condition. They were neither good nor bad. The doctor said that Xiao Yichen's condition was more serious. If his high fever didn't subside, it would lead to viral pneumonia, and his life would be in danger. Chapter 45:16. Yun Shirshir was scared out of her wits and stayed by Xiao Yichen's bedside. Yueyao's heart ached for her brother as well. She recalled how Xiao Yichen and Yu had fought over the tangerines she had peeled a few days ago. In the end, she had given the tangerines to Jing Yang. She had peeled 2 tangerines and wanted to give them to Xiao Yichen. Although she was still young, she could vaguely understand the doctor's words. When she found out that Xiao Yichen's condition was not optimistic, she was naturally unhappy. Jing Yang's heart ached when he saw this. He accompanied Yueyao to stay by Xiao Yichen's bedside. Xiao Yichen had just woken up from his foredrip and saw a group of people surrounding his bedside. His eyes widened in shock, and he almost cried out in fright. Yun Shirshir saw that he was crying and was extremely nervous. She hurriedly asked what was going on. In the end, Xiao Yichen said something that shocked everyone and made them not know whether to laugh or cry. "Am I dying?" "What do you mean? Did the doctor say that I can't be saved?" Xiao Yichen rubbed his eyes and cried pitifully. "Why are all of you surrounding me? It's as if you're looking at me for the last time." "Pooh!" Yun Shirshir hurriedly spat a few times. "What nonsense are you talking about? What do you mean you can't be saved? What do you mean you can't be saved? Everyone is just worried about you and wants to take care of you." Xiao Yichen's eyes were still red. "I thought my condition had worsened and they wanted me to leave a will." "Pooh!" Yu spat heavily. "If you keep spouting nonsense, I'll beat you up." "Xiao Yichen, be good. As long as you get through the fever and don't contract pneumonia, you'll be fine." Xiao Yichen nodded. Yun Shirshir hurriedly scooped out a bowl of porridge that she had just cooked. "Here, have some porridge. Eat more nutrients to increase your immune system." "Yes." Xiao Yichen didn't like porridge, but he couldn't eat anything right now. Because of the fever, he had no appetite at all. Not only that, he felt that he was about to become muddle-headed from the fever. His head was extremely heavy. He rarely had a fever, so he had experienced the pain of a high fever. His head hurt and his eyes hurt. It was so painful that his eyeballs felt like they were about to pop out. Because he was constantly blowing and wiping his nose, it was as if a layer of skin was being rubbed off from his nose. Yun Shirshir patiently fed him a bowl of porridge. In the end, Xiao Yichen woke up from his afternoon nap and felt his stomach churn. He threw himself into the trash can beside the bed and vomited. The porridge that he had eaten in the morning was all vomited out in the afternoon. After vomiting, he collapsed onto the bed as if he had lost all his strength. His stomach acid churned, and he felt so uncomfortable that tears fell from his eyes. Yun Shirshir's heart ached as she watched from the side. When had Xiao Yichen ever suffered like this? She couldn't help but recall Yu's childhood. She had also suffered like this in the hospital. She wished that she could take Xiao Yichen's place and suffer like this. Because Xiao Yichen had collapsed, the atmosphere in the ward became much heavier. The entire quarantine zone fell into a gloomy atmosphere. Everyone was on tenterhooks, afraid that they would be the first patient to die in the quarantine zone of the hospital. Outside the ward, the doctors and nurses were wearing protective clothing as they paced back and forth. At such a time, such a scene was inexplicably terrifying. Xiao Yichen didn't allow Yueyao to lie beside his bed because he was worried that she would pass the flu to her. Chapter 45:17. Yun Shirshir also felt sorry for Xiao Yichen, but she was also worried that Yueyao would be worried about her brother. Therefore, she asked her to wear a thicker mask. Xiao Yichen was on an foredrip for 2 consecutive days, and his condition kept fluctuating. One moment, his temperature would drop to 37 degrees, and at night, it would reach nearly 40 degrees. His entire body would be hot, and in the end, he would become delirious. Yun Shirshir had not slept well for a few days. Mu Yaja felt sorry for her and suggested that she go home to get some sleep. She was unwilling, but in the end, Mu Yaja forced her to go home. She had not slept for a few days. Staying up all night would also affect her immune system. In addition, Yun Shirshir had a delicate and weak body, so Mu Yaja was still worried. After Xianxia went home, he was responsible for taking care of the three little guys. In the past, Mu Yaja would definitely not be able to take care of himself. The three little guys would definitely make a mess. However, ever since Xianxia was pregnant with Yueyao, he had to take care of everything from the pregnancy to the delivery, to the confinement and breastfeeding period. Who was born to do housework and take care of babies? Wasn't it all acquired through training? When Yueyao grew up, Mu Yaja also had the ability to take care of babies. When he took care of babies, he was not inferior to a top nanny. However, on the other hand, Chuho had to take care of the two little guys. They had just been weaned, and their immune system was too weak. If she went to the hospital too often, she would have to be isolated from the two little guys. Therefore, the heavy responsibility of taking care of Xiaobao fell on Gu Jinglian's shoulders. However, Gu Jinglian had always been taken care of. When did he have the experience of taking care of others? When Chuho was in confinement, he volunteered to take care of his wife during her confinement, but in the end, he took care of her in a mess. In the end, he was chased away by Chuho. Xiaobao was hospitalized and Uncle Fu was old. If it were anyone else, they would be worried as well. Moreover, Xiaobao also said that he wanted Gu Jinglian to accompany him. Naturally, Gu Jinglian could only do it himself. In the end, Xiaobao regretted it a few days later. How did Gu Jinglian clean his face? Just like wiping a table, she covered Xiaobao's face with the face towel like a rag. Then, like kneading dough twists, she rubbed his face until it was red. Gu Jinglian believed that since her face was red, she must have scrubbed it clean. Every time he finished scrubbing his face, Xiaobao's face would turn red as if he was drunk. It was as if a layer of his skin had been peeled off. Gu Jinglian felt a sense of accomplishment. Xiaobao then looked to the side and saw how Mu Yaja was gently wiping Xiao Yichen's face and hands. He was so jealous that he was speechless. He patted the blanket and shouted at Gu Jinglian's back view indignantly, "Dad! What's the use of being handsome? You don't know how to cook or wash clothes. You can't even take care of a patient well. Can your handsome face be used as food?" Gu Jinglian turned around gloomily. He was about to flare up, but since Xiaobao said that he was handsome, he was satisfied. Xiao Yichen was not convinced when he heard this. He supported his weak body to sit up and said indignantly, "Is your dad handsome? He's not as handsome as my dad. My dad is the most handsome in the world. He's the richest and the most gentle. Can your dad compare to him?" Chapter 45:18. Mu Yaja's eyelids twitched fiercely. It was understandable for children to brag and compete. But when did violence become a category of comparison? My daddy won't compete with you in violence. Xiao Yichen gave him a thumbs up. My daddy is rich. My daddy has a lot of money. He can build a few Eiffel Towers for me to climb with his money. Mu Yaja almost vomited blood. He was secretly calculating if he could really build a few Eiffel Towers with his wealth. While he was still calculating, the two little guys had already started bragging. My daddy can cook Chinese food, Western food, pasta, instant noodles, and pizza. My father knows how to write song calligraphy in regular script and seal script. Every piece of calligraphy is priceless. Our family lives in a big villa. Our family has a big courtyard. My daddy's Xingyu Financial Group can buy your Gu Corporation. My daddy can buy Xingyu if he sells the Gu Mansion. Huff huff. Puff. The two little guys were panting after 300 rounds of verbal sparring. Yu suddenly walked gracefully in front of Xiao Yichen and said calmly, "Xiao Yichen, open your mouth." What? As soon as Xiao Yichen opened his mouth, Yu immediately stuck the thermometer into his mouth. Xiao Yichen frowned, held the thermometer in his mouth, and glared at Yu. Wow, it's finally quiet. Yu took a deep breath and suddenly felt that the world had become beautiful. Haha, who told you to show off? Now you can't say anything, right? While Xiaobao was feeling smug, Gu Jinglian's tall figure had already approached. Before he could react, the big devil pinched his cheek and stuffed the thermometer into his mouth. This time, the two little guys were as quiet as chickens and stared at each other. However, even so, neither of them was convinced. They crossed their arms and glared at each other with resentment. 5 minutes later, Yi took out the thermometer and looked at the temperature. His brows furrowed. Tisk. Mu Yaja came over sternly. How is it? The temperature has risen again. Yu showed the thermometer to Mu Yaja. 39.5 degrees. High fevers are recurring. This situation is not optimistic. Gu Jinglian started to worry as well. Although they usually bickered, he was still worried about little Yichen's condition at critical moments. Should we call the doctor? The doctor came this morning and prescribed some medicine and drips, but his condition is still not improving. If this situation continues, little Yichen will be sent to the quarantine zone. The complete isolation zone was the severe isolation zone. That meant that his life could be in danger. Usually, a patient would be in a room in such an isolated area and no one would have the right to visit them. Xiao Yichen was also worried. He lay on the hospital bed and looked listless. Is the fever coming on again? The fever had already subsided this morning. Will I never recover? Try saying that again. Yu and Mu Yaja said in unison. Xiao Yichen kept quiet. Xiao Bao couldn't bear to see him like this. All right, I won't argue with you anymore. It won't be too late to argue with me when you're fully recovered. Now, get some rest. Chapter 45:19. Xiao Yichen glanced at him resentfully from the corner of his eyes. That's why you should keep a distance from me. Don't get infected by me when the time comes. What's there to be afraid of? I'm not afraid of getting sick. Gu Jinglian suddenly became nervous and gave him a knock on the head. Don't raise a flag. Xiao Bao tilted his head. Dad, what's a flag? Gu Jinglian pinched his son's cheeks in disappointment. Although he was angry at him, his heart ached for him even more. These words were just like how a general would say to his beloved female lead in a TV series, "When I come back victorious, I'll marry you." It was as scary as that. However, Gu Jinglian's worries came true very quickly. The next day, Gu Jinglian woke up after a night of watching over Xiao Bao. He had a high fever. The doctor did his rounds and checked on his condition. He said that Xiao Bao's condition had worsened just like Xiao Yichen's. Hence, he suggested that Xiao Yichen and Xiao Bao be quarantined. This would be considered a completely quarantined area. Gu Jinglian's heart sank when he heard this. He was still wondering if he had not taken good care of Xiao Bao and Xiao Bao's condition had worsened instead. Mu Yaja also could not bear to send Xiao Yichen to quarantined alone. After all, if they were quarantined alone, he would not have the right to visit them. Xiao Yichen would definitely be lonely in the quarantined area alone. However, since the doctor had said so, Mu Yaja had no choice but to agree for Xiao Yichen's sake. Gu Jinglian naturally agreed. He had even thought that Xiao Bao would recover soon and be discharged from the hospital. He did not expect Xiao Bao's condition to worsen as well. Chu Ho and Yun Shishir found out that they would be transferred to the quarantine area in the afternoon. Despite Mu Yaja and Gu Jinglian's attempts to stop them, they insisted on coming over to take a look. Both of them were worried sick. In the afternoon, Yun Shishir and Chu Ho rushed over one after another. Xiao Bao and Xiao Yichen's conditions had taken a turn for the worse. Whatever they ate, they would vomit it out after a while. Not only did they have a high fever, but their mental states were also worrying. Yue Yao secretly hid in the bathroom and cried. Jing Yang accompanied her and couldn't bear it. Yu stayed by Xiao Yichen's bedside and held his hand tightly. Although he usually found this older brother annoying, Xiao Yichen was in a critical situation. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't help but cry. Even though he was seriously injured, he endured it and didn't cry. Facing the extremely weak Xiao Yichen, Yu couldn't hold back his tears anymore. He clenched his teeth and covered his face as he cried secretly. Xiao Yichen could only open his eyes and look at him. He didn't even have the strength to speak. He wanted to raise his head and hold Yu's hand to comfort him and tell him not to worry, but he didn't even have the strength to speak. Xiao Bao's condition wasn't any better. He was much more delicate than Xiao Yichen to begin with. Initially, he was still strong enough to endure the pain of his high fever. However, when he saw Chu Ho, he immediately broke down and sobbed sadly. I feel terrible. He felt as if his entire body was on fire, but he was also extremely cold. He felt hot with the blanket wrapped around him, but without the blanket he was so cold that he shivered. He didn't even have the strength to get out of bed. Chu Ho rushed over and hugged him tightly. She couldn't bear to part with him. She had secretly asked the doctor about Xiao Bao's condition, but the doctor couldn't be sure. Chapter 45:20. After all, no one was prepared for the sudden onset of the flu. What he meant was that Xiao Bao and Xiao Yichen were in a similar predicament. As for the other children, even though they were not suffering from any symptoms yet, they could not rule out the possibility that the flu virus was still in its incubation stage. Since it was an unknown flu, no one could determine the mortality rate, cure rate, and sequelae of the flu. All they could do was try their best to save the children and study them. Many hospitals in the capital had news of nurses and doctors collapsing. A few nurses' immune systems had deteriorated due to inadequate protection and working overtime. Unfortunately, they were infected. Apart from that, many doctors had been fighting on the front lines for a long time and fell ill from overwork. Some even died on the operating table. The constant news reports made the public anxious and immersed themselves in the fear of the flu. On the streets, in the shopping malls, and in schools, everyone was wearing a mask. Taking the temperature every morning had become a routine. The thermometers in the pharmacies were sold out. In the alleys of the city, everyone was on tenterhooks, afraid that they would fall victim to the flu virus. Even if they could not accept it, they had no choice but to accept it. Yun Shishir secretly cried in the bathroom for a long time. She wiped her tears and applied cold water to her face before walking out of the bathroom. She walked to Xiao Yichen's bedside and replaced Yu. Xiao Yichen gently held Yun Shishir's hand. He looked at the doctors and nurses who had surrounded the bed and asked nervously, "Mommy, am I going to be quarantined?"
Yeah.
Yun Shishir squeezed his palm and choked back her sobs. "It's okay. It's just a small problem. Mommy will wait for you to get better, okay?" "Yeah, I think it's just a small problem too." Xiao Yichen blinked and said disapprovingly, "I'm in good health. How can I be defeated by such a small flu virus?"
Yeah.
Yun Shishir nodded her head vigorously as though she was using Xiao Yichen's words to convince herself. Xiao Yichen couldn't bear to see her holding back her sadness. He pursed his lips and looked at the ceiling to hold back his tears. He was not afraid of getting sick, but he was afraid that Yun Shishir would be worried. She was so fragile. If she worried about him all the time, she would not be able to eat or sleep well. He must not show any signs of weakness, otherwise she would be even more worried. Therefore, Xiao Yichen pretended to be relaxed and said, "Mommy, when I leave the quarantine zone, I want to eat your black pepper steak. That will have to wait until you come out. For the sake of Mommy's black pepper steak, I have to work hard to get healthy." Xiao Yichen said confidently, "Don't worry, Mommy. I won't make you wait for too long." The doctor and nurse looked at each other and felt a little sad. The nurse walked over and said to Xiao Yichen, "Little boy, say goodbye to your daddy and mommy, okay?" "I don't need to say goodbye." Xiao Yichen's voice was a little choked up, but he still said stubbornly, "I'll be back soon." He and Xiao Bao were moved to a gurney and slowly pushed out of the ward. A group of people surrounded them as they walked towards the quarantine zone. 2 hospital beds were pushed to the quarantine zone door, one after the other. Xiao Bao's bed was pushed over to be next to Xiao Yichen's. Chapter 45:21. Xiao Yichen saw the fear and trepidation in Xiao Bao's eyes. He reached out his hand and said, "Come, hold my hand." Through the mask, Little Treasure winked mischievously at him and held his hand in the same way. Perhaps to Xiao Bao, the flu was just an ordinary cold. It wasn't that serious. However, Xiao Yichen was deeply aware of what he and Xiao Bao were facing at the same time. It was a test of life. If they couldn't pass this test, they might not be able to survive. He heard from the doctor that although he had a good physique, he rarely fell sick since he was young. Because of this, his body produced very few antibodies. As a result, his illness came like a landslide. He didn't have many antibodies to defend against the flu virus. Hence, he collapsed. The 2 children were sent to the quarantine area. Yun Shishir was distracted all day and all night. She didn't know when Xiao Yichen would be able to walk out of the coma. However, at the same time, there was good news. Yuyao's condition was slowly improving. If there were no accidents within a week, he should be able to be discharged. Yu had to be observed for a period of time. During this period of time, Xianxia was invited by the company to participate in a charity performance. It was a song that praised the angel in white. It was used to encourage the medical staff on the front line. At the same time, it was used to calm the panic of the public. Xianxia suppressed her worry and went to the sound engineer to record a demo. Xiao Yichen and Xiao Bao were sent to the quarantine area. The ward suddenly quieted down. Gu Jinglian had been staying in the ward for the past few days. Xiao Bao wasn't around and Mu Yaja couldn't take care of Yue Yao and Yu on his own. Moreover, Jing Qi was also ill. Hence, Gu Jinglian helped to take care of Jing Yang. Jing Yang was especially afraid of Gu Jinglian. There was a type of person who, no matter how good-looking he was, had an irresistible aura that made people flinch at the sight of him. Gu Jinglian belonged to this type of person. No matter how calm and approachable he appeared, he couldn't hide his sharp aura at all. Every time Gu Jinglian wiped his face, Jing Yang would be as quiet as a puppet. He wouldn't move at all. Yu was speechless. Was Gu Jinglian that scary? Why was Jing Yang so afraid? For a few days, there was no news about Xiao Bao and Xiao Yichen's condition. They didn't know if their conditions had improved or worsened. The man looked calm on the surface, but in reality, he was more worried than anyone else. Yue Yao and Yu Yu's were. Yu said, "Actually, we seem to have neglected little Yichen. Even if he's my brother, he's not much older than me. He was only born an hour or two earlier than me, but he bears more responsibilities than anyone else." As the saying went, the crying child would get candy. However, Xiao Yichen was too stingy with his tears. Perhaps Mu Yaja had given him a special education since he was young. When he was half an adult, he was thrown into a special training camp. He had developed a strong character. No matter how wronged he was, he wouldn't cry easily. In front of Yu, he also relied on his identity as Yu's elder brother. He took care of Yu just as much as Mu Yaja and Xianxia. He was very attentive. Chapter 45:22. In Xianxia's heart, a bowl of water was not full. In addition, Yu had always been weak, so she focused on Yu and ignored Xiao Yichen's needs. Xiao Yichen also rarely asked for any conditions because he felt that as an older brother, he should be more sensible and not act like a spoiled child. It was because he did not fight for anything, and did not even act like a spoiled child. This made it easier for people to overlook his desires. The more sensible a child was, the easier it was for people to forget that he was still a child. Xiao Yichen was only a little over 10 years old. Like Yu, he also had times when his immune system was weak. At such a time, Xiao Yichen still had a youthful sense of heroism. Xianxia was restless all day. Although Mu Yaja maintained his composure on the surface, only God knew how worried he was. Compared to them, Gu Jinglian was much calmer. Even though Chu Ho came to the hospital later and wanted to visit and was rejected, she was much calmer than Xianxia. Even though Xiao Bao was now in the quarantine area, which was equivalent to the intensive care unit, not just anyone could visit him. She also thought optimistically that being quarantined would only be temporary. Children who liked to smile would have good luck. Xiao Bao would definitely get better. It had to be said that emotions could be infectious. Chu Ho's strength and optimism also infected Xianxia. Xianxia finally pulled herself together. When Xianxia pulled herself together, Mu Yaja naturally calmed down a lot. However, it was impossible to say that she was not worried about Xiao Bao at all. Chu Ho refused to leave the hospital. The two little guys had already been entrusted to Uncle Fu's mother. She insisted on staying in the hospital and waiting for Xiao Bao to come out of the quarantine area. She usually helped Xianxia take care of the children. With her and Gu Jinglian around, the burden on Mu Yaja and Xianxia was much lighter. One time when they were free, Xianxia couldn't help but ask curiously, "Chu Ho, aren't you worried about Xiao Bao?" "Not worried? How could he not be worried? I will only be more worried than you. But you seem to be much calmer than me." When Chu Ho heard this, he smiled and said, "What else can I do? Am I supposed to panic and not choose a path?" Xiao Bao is in the quarantine zone. He must miss me a lot. The only thing I can do every day is to call him and hear him tell me that he's safe. It was because I wanted to cheer him up that I had to be spirited. You know, emotions can be contagious. Only when I show confidence can I make him believe that his illness is just a minor illness and maintain a positive attitude. When Xianxia heard this, she nodded and said, I also want to encourage Xianxia. However, it seems like I'm the one who needs more encouragement. A mother is strong. A mother is the child's biggest reliance. However, Xianxia, you are already very strong. Don't worry, everything will be fine. Chu Ho patted her shoulder gently. Xianxia was already stronger than she had imagined. If her children were quarantined, she would not be able to be so calm. In fact, in the quarantine area, Xianxia's condition was not very good. He was originally the strongest one, but in the quarantine area, he was critically ill. Because of his high fever, he contracted viral pneumonia. Viral pneumonia could be understood as the late stage of influenza. Chapter 45-23. Xianxia also knew that his condition was getting worse. Every time he saw the medical staff enter the ward fully equipped to take care of him, give him injections and infusions, and put on more and more masks, he gradually understood that his condition was not as optimistic as he had imagined. However, he did not want Xianxia to worry. Even though he had a high fever and was dizzy, he still managed to stay awake and talk to her for more than 10 minutes. Once, after hanging up the phone, he fainted and was on the verge of going into shock due to exhaustion. In the end, the medical staff used a pacemaker to pull him back from the jaws of death. He did not dare to say anything about all this. What? The flu is raging all over the world? Hua Jin held Alice's shoulder anxiously. Is the flu virus serious this time? I spoke to Xianxia on the phone and she said that all the hospitals are overcrowded. Moreover, the customs all over the world are heavily guarded and it's very difficult to pass through. Even if one had a fever or a cold one day, they would be quarantined for observation. The whole world was in a state of high alert. This flu is very aggressive and has spread crazily all over the world. According to the researchers, the first case was a person who accidentally ate a piece of infected pork and went abroad for a vacation. This flu is the most contagious among children. Even adults with weak immune systems can't escape from it. Hua Jin said with lingering fear, At first, I thought it was just a common cold. Later, I heard that there were already deaths. Now, I heard that Xianxia's condition is very serious. Yueyao and Yu are still quarantined in the hospital. I wonder how they are doing? Initially, when he found out that the 3 little guys were infected with the flu, he was in a hurry to go back. However, the customs clearance was very strict. Anyone with the slightest sign of a cold would be quarantined. Even those who seemed to be perfectly healthy had to go through health procedures. The global tourism industry was in a terrible downturn. Because of this flu, all the industries in the world were facing huge losses. So far, there have been hundreds of deaths around the world. Among them, there are many doctors who died in the line of duty. Hua Jin was a little restless. By the way, is there any news from Xianxia recently? Alice shook her head. Thanks to the flu, there's been no news from Xianxia. So far, we haven't gotten any news about him. He can't be trapped in another country's territory, right? It's not impossible. Alice was also worried. But don't worry too much. Do you think Xianxia might have accidentally contracted the flu? After all, the flu is raging all over the world now, and many people are infected without any precautions. How would I know? I'm not one of his immune cells. Alice narrowed her eyes and changed the topic. You seem to be very concerned about him? Aren't you worried? Alice replied truthfully. I'm worried. How could he not be worried? It was just that she wasn't as obvious as he was. Hua Jin disagreed. Isn't it normal to be worried? Alice said, Don't worry. With Xianxia's physique, he'll definitely. Chapter 45-24. Alice widened her eyes in shock. What? Don't raise flags. Flags? What did he mean by that? Haven't you heard of it? In many television dramas, the general would say to his childhood sweetheart, When I'm done with this war, I'll come back and marry you. And then, Hua Jin looked gloomy. And then the general never came back. He died on the battlefield. Alice was speechless. Look, Xianxia also said that with Xiao Yichen's amazing physique, he won't fall sick easily. Look, his illness came like a landslide. He's completely quarantined now. Xianxia can't even see him more than a few times now. Alice licked her lips awkwardly and started to fidget. Pooh! She hurriedly spat it out. Hua Jin slumped on the sofa. He wanted to go back to China, but he couldn't. He didn't know where Gongjie was. Although it was absolutely safe here, he couldn't go anywhere else. Anxiety. Anxiety, it was another torturous few days. There was good news from the hospital. The authoritative professor had already extracted the influenza virus DNA in the research lab and put it into the research of a vaccine. Everyone was looking forward to the development of a vaccine to cure this influenza virus as soon as possible. Chu Ho inquired about Xiao Bao's condition from the office. Compared to Xiao Yichen, Xiao Bao's condition was gradually stabilizing. You should be on good terms with Mu Yichen's parents, right? The doctor asked in a roundabout manner. Chu Ho nodded. She came to the office alone. Yun Xianxia didn't come with her. Hence, the doctor told her everything. Compared to Xiao Bao, Mu Yichen's condition doesn't seem to be as optimistic. A child with the same condition as him has unfortunately passed away this morning. Chu Ho's expression froze when she heard this. What do you mean by that? I want her to be mentally prepared, but I don't dare to say this in front of her. Chu Ho's gaze fell on the stack of files beside the doctor's hand. On top of it was a report on the donation of a body for medical research. In the age column, the person who wrote it was only 7 years old. This file should be from the child who passed away this morning from the flu that the doctor mentioned? Only 7 years old. He was still so young. He was about the same age as Xiao Bao. Chu Ho felt her heart ache just thinking about it. If she were in their shoes, she really couldn't imagine how the child's parents endured the pain and signed the agreement to donate the body. The doctor looked at the report and let out a long sigh. There were obvious traces of tears at the corner of his eyes. She was a very lovely girl. Before she died, she said that her wish was to eliminate this influenza. Her parents are university professors. After learning of their daughter's wish, they signed the donation agreement. Chu Ho clenched her fists. She calmed herself down and asked, then, Xiao Yichen, is his condition that serious too? The doctor replied truthfully, yes, it's much more serious than this. What? Xiao Yichen's condition was worse than this girl's. Then wouldn't it be very dangerous? That was impossible. When he was video chatting with Yun Xianxia, he clearly appeared to be very relaxed. Chapter 45-25. There were no signs at all. For some reason, Chu Ho's heart sank. Xiao Bao's condition had stabilized, but for some reason, because of Xiao Yichen, she couldn't feel happy or excited at all. She really liked Xiao Yichen. Back then, Gu Jinglian had also mentioned this child. In order to protect Lisa and Yu, Xiao Yichen had sacrificed an unimaginable amount of effort. Why was the illness so unfair to this sensible and obedient child? When Chu Ho returned to the ward, Yun Xianxia had just finished washing the clothes. When she saw Chu Ho, she quickly went up to her and asked, Chu Ho, have you asked the doctor? How's Xiao Bao's condition? When Chu Ho saw her, she didn't know how to answer. She could only smile and say, the doctor said that Xiao Bao's condition has stabilized. Really? Yun Xianxia's eyebrows relaxed happily. She was genuinely happy for her. That's great. Does this mean that if there are no accidents, Xiao Bao will be able to leave the quarantine area soon? Before the vaccine is developed, we can't be sure. If he hasn't fully recovered, he can't leave the quarantine area. Then, at least this means that Xiao Bao's condition is much better. Yun Xianxia asked again, did the doctor say anything about Xiao Yichen's condition? Chu Ho was speechless. Her expression suddenly darkened. She was someone who couldn't hide her thoughts. When Xiao Yichen was mentioned, her expression turned ugly. When Yun Xianxia saw this, she immediately guessed something. She asked tentatively, the doctor said that Xiao Yichen's condition isn't very optimistic, right? Yeah. What's the situation? Yun Xianxia grabbed her hand and said, Chu Ho, tell me the truth. Sure, I don't want to hide it from you. Xiao Yichen's condition is critical. His condition is more serious than you think. There's a little girl who just this morning, her parents signed the agreement to donate her body. Xiao Yichen's condition is much worse than hers. Even the doctors are impressed. Perhaps it's because of his strong willpower that he's able to hold on until now. Before Chu Ho could finish his words, Yun Shirshi's eyes widened and tears rolled down her cheeks. When Chu Ho saw this, he was even more at a loss. Sure, I didn't want to tell you at first, but I hope that you're mentally prepared. Nobody wants the worst to happen, but I can't hide anything from you. Yun Shirshir lowered her head and wiped her tears with the back of her hand. It's okay. I asked you to tell the truth. But even though she was comforting him like this, his tears still flowed even more violently. Yun Shirshir choked a little and said, "That's impossible. Xiao Yichen and I video call each other every night. He seems very optimistic when I see his condition. I even thought that he would recover soon. I've already made plans to get him out of the hospital." Chu Ho sighed and said, "That's because he didn't want you to worry. Actually, he knows his own condition best. I heard that there was one time when he went into shock after hanging up the phone because he was exhausted. He had to use a pacemaker to pull him back." Yun Shirshir became nervous. "Should I not video call him every day?" "Shirshir, sit down first." When Chu Ho saw Yun Shirshir's helpless expression, his heart ached terribly. Yun Shirshir was extremely disappointed. Chapter 45-26. In front of Chu Ho, Yun Shirshir wanted to remain calm. However, when she thought about how Xiao Yichen had forced himself to smile during the video call, the more sensible he was, the more her heart ached. When she thought about the possibility of losing him, the memories of the past resurfaced. Or perhaps, when she was about to lose him, she regretted not doing enough and had many regrets. She broke down and covered her face as she let out a suppressed cry. When Chu Ho saw this, his heart ached unbearably. She might not be able to empathize, but if the doctor told her today that Xiao Bao's condition was getting worse, she might break down even more than Yun Shirshir. How is that possible? Yun Shirshir couldn't figure it out. Shock. How could his condition be so serious? If it's already this serious, why didn't the doctor tell us? Chu Ho's expression was solemn. "What's wrong with Xiao Yichen?" Suddenly, Yu Yu's startled voice came from the door. "Shock? What shock?" Yun Shirshir raised her head in shock and looked in Yu Yu's direction. However, she saw him holding Yue Yao's hand and standing at the door with a stunned expression. His fingers, which were holding the door frame, were trembling uncontrollably. "Mommy, what's wrong with Xiao Yichen? Didn't you say that if there were no accidents, he'd recover soon?" She didn't know when he had stood at the door, nor did she know how much he had hurt. Yun Shirshir was a little flustered. Yu, don't be nervous. I heard everything just now." Yu said directly, "I heard you guys say that Xiao Yichen's condition is very dangerous. What's going on?" Yun Shirshir bit her lip and didn't say anything. "Mommy, tell me." Yu walked over quickly. Yue Yao was also frightened. Tears fell from her eyes. Children did not know how to hold back. "What?" she cried. Chu Ho was completely flustered. He hurriedly walked over and picked up Yue Yao. "Yue Yao, don't cry. I don't want you. I want Big Brother." As Yue Yao spoke, she couldn't stop crying. She clenched her fists and kicked her legs. "I miss Big Brother. I want to see Big Brother. I haven't seen him for a long time. I want Big Brother." Yu grabbed Yun Shirshir's hand tightly and almost interrogated her. "Mommy, tell me." I don't know. I really don't know anything. What's going on with Xiao Yichen? I don't have any information at all." When Yu heard this, he frowned. His eyes flickered for a moment before he turned around and rushed out of the ward. Yun Shirshir chased after him, only to see him rushing towards the doctor's office. "Doctor?" He rushed to the door of the doctor's office. Without knocking, he pushed the door open and entered. The doctor was sitting in front of the desk. In front of him sat a young couple who looked very down. When Yu saw this scene, his heart skipped a beat. He didn't know why, but he immediately suppressed it. "Yu, what's the matter?" When the doctor saw him, he looked concerned. "What happened? Where's my brother? Yu walked over and glanced at the young couple. He saw that their eyes were red and it was obvious that they had been crying not long ago. When he saw the donation agreement on the table, his face turned pale with fright. Chapter 45:27. When the woman saw Yu, she seemed to be reminded of her daughter. She broke down and cried, "Boo-hoo! I don't want to have another child. I've already lost Duo. She's still so young. Even if she's gone, I can't abandon her. If you ask me to have another child, I feel like I'm betraying Duo. Back then, if she had any symptoms of the flu, I could have sent her to the hospital in time. Perhaps she wouldn't have died so easily." As she spoke, the woman couldn't go on. Obviously, as her husband, he had just comforted her that they could have another child even if they lost their daughter. However, when she saw Yu and thought about how the last time she saw Duo was a cold corpse, her psychological barrier finally collapsed. The man quickly comforted her. "Oh, we only have one child. We won't have another child." They had come this time to get their daughter's death certificate. However, when she saw the death certificate, her heart ached uncontrollably. The man was already very sad, but he still had to suppress it and comfort his wife. This flu had taken away their beloved daughter, but it had also taken away half of their lives. When Yu saw them crying, she became even more worried about Xianxia. She walked to the doctor and asked worriedly, "Where's my brother? How is he now? Can I see him?" "Your brother's condition is still considered stable." The doctor hesitated for a moment. "If you want to see him, it's a bit difficult. After all, he's now in the quarantine area. You can't go in." "I want to see him." As Yu spoke, her voice gradually became choked. "I really miss my brother. I want to see him. Even if it's just once." "You're not sick, right? Can't you still see the patient?" "That's because you're wearing protective clothing. I can wear it too." Yu looked at the woman and then at the man. She said to the doctor, "Do you know why they're so sad? It's because they didn't even get to see their biological daughter even once until she died of illness. The next time they saw her, it was only a cold corpse. This is their lifelong regret." "Doctor, I miss my brother. I want to see him. Please." With that, Yu stood firmly where she was, biting her lip and glaring at him with tears in her eyes. The doctor hesitated for a moment. "I have to ask my superiors." "You don't have to ask for instructions from your superiors." An extremely domineering voice suddenly came from the door. Yu and the doctor turned around simultaneously and saw Wuxia and Xianxia standing at the door. "Daddy?" Wuxia looked at him, smiled and looked at the doctor. "Take us to him." "Chairman Mu, no matter what the consequences are, I can bear it. I can also be responsible for my actions." Wuxia paused for a moment and said, "I remember that the protective suits of your hospital were donated by the Xinyu Financial Group. These protective suits are made of imported nanomaterials, so you don't have to worry. Don't let us, the family members, bear the burden of regret because of your courtyard's superficial words." Sigh. The doctor finally sighed. "All right. However, I still have to ask for instructions. My authority is limited. My words don't count. Then please take me to see the director." Wuxia followed the doctor. Chapter 45:28. The woman who had lost her daughter was crying so hard that she was about to faint. Her tears seemed to have dried up overnight. She could no longer cry, but she was still crying so hard that her whole body was twitching. Streaks of red tears could be seen on her face. "How did this happen?" The woman said sadly, "I thought that everything would get better." Sob, 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 sob. Xianxia wanted to comfort her, but she felt that she was in no position to do so. If she were in this woman's shoes, she would have fainted from crying. When a person was really sad, what they needed was not someone to comfort them, but a shoulder to lean on or to cry with them so that they could vent all the sadness in their heart through their tears. This was good too. After a while, Wuxia finally returned. Xianxia stood up excitedly when she saw him. "What did he say?" "The hospital director has agreed. We can go in and visit Xianxia now. But Yueyao can't go in." "Even if Yueyao can go in, I won't agree." She didn't even want Yu to go in with them. However, Yu must be worried sick about Xiao Yichen. If she didn't let him in, he would definitely be angry. After receiving instructions, the three of them couldn't wait to go to the quarantine area. They changed into sterile protective clothing and followed the doctor into the quarantine area. In fact, the quarantine area wasn't as scary as they had imagined. However, because the influenza virus was airborne, everyone who entered and left the quarantine area had to wear thick protective clothing. Even so, there were rumors that some doctors and nurses had died at their posts because they were too tired and didn't take proper protective measures. The first room in front is Mu Yichen's bed. When Yu heard this, he immediately let go of Yun Shishir's hand and ran into the room. When he opened the door, he saw that the heater was turned on. Moreover, he was wearing a mask, so his vision was foggy. Yu didn't have time to wipe the fog off the soft glass and ran to the bed. Xiao Yichen was lying on the bed with his eyes closed. It was hard to tell if he was awake or asleep. He walked over, and the sound of footsteps startled him. Xiao Yichen finally opened his eyes. When he saw Yu, he was shocked. Yu, it's me, brother, he called out. Xiao Yichen felt like he was in a fantasy. Firstly, this was the quarantine zone. How could Yu come in so easily? Secondly, how could this brat obediently call him Big Brother? Xiao Yichen mumbled to himself in a daze. Am I dreaming? Idiot, it's not a dream. It's not just me. Before he could finish speaking, Xiao Yichen saw Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir enter the room. He was even more dumbfounded. Just as he was about to speak, he started coughing violently. Cough, cough, cough. He couldn't stop coughing. When Yu saw this, his heart ached and he was angry. Don't talk anymore. Didn't the doctor tell you to lie down properly? I'm not dreaming, am I? Xiao Yichen was suspicious again. He stammered, how could a brat like you be so obedient and call me Big Brother? Yu didn't know why, but Xiao Yichen's words sounded like he was teasing him. However, he didn't know why his eyes started to sting. Chapter 45-29. Was he that bad in the past? Yu's tears flowed uncontrollably. Choking, he said, Bro, if you can't hear enough, I can keep calling you. When Xiao Yichen saw that Yu was crying, he was at a loss. He felt helpless and tried hard to wipe his tears. However, Yu was wearing a sterile gown and his eyes were like soft glass. There was nothing he could do. He could only say sadly, Don't cry. I was just joking. After a pause, he looked in the direction of Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir. What's wrong with you guys? Why are you in the quarantine zone? You're making such a big fuss. I'll think that you're here to say goodbye to me. Don't say such depressing things. Yu pouted and pinched his cheeks gently. Because Xiao Yichen was sick, he could not bear to use too much strength. Who's here to say goodbye to you? We just miss you. Yu's words shocked Xiao Yichen. Oh my god. Was this the arrogant Yu who always said one thing and meant another? She actually told him that she missed him without any hesitation. This was too much. Xiao Yichen pretended to be relaxed. There's no need for that. I'm actually doing quite well. The doctor said that my condition is slowly stabilizing. You're lying. Yu pouted. The doctor said that a little girl whose condition was not as serious as yours had already passed away. Xiao Yichen let out a short sound. He looked at Yu in shock and disbelief. Are you talking about Duo? Yeah. I don't know if it was this morning or yesterday. Her parents just signed the donation agreement. No wonder I haven't seen her for a few days. Xiao Yichen felt a wave of regret. When he heard that Duo's parents had signed the donation agreement, he could not help but ask, did she really listen to me and donate the body for research? What did you say? I said. Xiao Yichen licked his lips and said straightforwardly, if I really can't be cured because of this flu, I'll donate my body so that the doctors can develop a vaccine as soon as possible. This flu is too annoying. If I die because of it, it won't have a good time either. Xiao Yichen's original intention was to lighten the mood. However, his brain was clumsy and his mouth was thick. The words that came out of his mouth were not very pleasing. Yu pinched his lips and said, don't talk about death all the time. When did I say that all day long? Xiao Yichen pushed Yu Yu's hand away and explained, "This isn't bad luck. Everyone who enters this quarantine zone is seriously ill. I also want to get better quickly, but my body isn't working well. There's nothing I can do." When Yu Yu heard this, he suddenly hugged him sadly. "I don't care. You have to get better quickly. This is an order." Xiao Yichen looked at Yu Yu and sighed helplessly. He gently patted his head and said, "Okay, I'll do as you say, Master Yu." Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir looked at the two little guys who were deeply affectionate and were extremely touched. Yun Shishir walked to the bedside and asked worriedly, "Why did you lose so much weight? I heard from the doctor that you have a bad appetite." "It's not that I have a bad appetite." Chapter 45-30. Yun Shishir's heart ached for him. No wonder he had lost so much weight. It wasn't like he had lost weight in a day or two. Had he been like this for so many days? Had he vomited after eating? Xiao Yichen looked at Yun Shishir and asked worriedly, "Mommy, did the doctor say that my condition is very serious?" Yun Shishir could only sigh, not knowing how to answer. Yu Yu was extremely straightforward. "The doctor said that your condition is very serious. He even said that you went into shock once. If it wasn't for the timely rescue, you might have..." Xiao Yichen heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. "It seems like I'm quite lucky." Xiao Yichen was naturally optimistic. Even when he heard that he had almost died, he looked indifferent. Yu Yu's heart ached when she saw this. Xiao Yichen suddenly said, "Oh yes, Mommy, can I ask you for a favor?" Yun Shishir looked at him in confusion. "What is it? What do you want me to do? I'm like Duo. Can you help me sign a donation agreement?" Yun Shishir's body trembled uncontrollably when she heard this. Tears rolled down her cheeks at once. Xiao Yichen suddenly felt a little guilty. "I didn't mean to make Mommy sad. It's just that the doctor said that my condition isn't optimistic, so I was thinking that if there's really no other way, can I be like Duo and donate my body to the hospital?" "Xiao Yichen, give Mommy some confidence," Yun Shishir said sadly. "Don't let Mommy think that way. Mommy can promise you that, but don't say such things again, okay?" She and Mu Yaja were both open-minded people. They wouldn't object to the donation of a body because of some traditional beliefs. However, this didn't mean that Xiao Yichen could bring it up. Now, no matter who it was, she hoped that they could give her more confidence. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. It was like a slow death by 1,000 cuts. Every day, a piece of flesh would be cut off. Every day, another piece of flesh would be cut off. Xiao Yichen was upset when he heard Yun Shishir's words. "Mommy?" Yun Shishir couldn't help but hug him tightly. "Xiao Yichen, it's Mommy's fault. I didn't cherish you when I should have. Perhaps, only when you're about to lose it will you understand how much Mommy owes you." Little Yichen was stunned for a moment before he smiled. "Mommy, don't say that. Are you trying to make me cry? You're as important as Yu. We can't lose you, much less lose you. You must not know this, but Yueyao misses you so much that she's gone crazy. She keeps asking to see you, but she's still so young. She can't possibly enter the quarantine zone. Can you bear to see her miss you so much? So you have to get better soon, okay?" Xiao Yichen could hold back his tears at first, but when he heard about Yueyao, his tears suddenly went out of control. He couldn't suppress the sadness and uneasiness in his heart anymore. He bit his lip tightly and said hoarsely, "Mommy, I miss Yueyao too." Yun Shishir wiped his tears and said helplessly, "You and Yu are a pair of clowns. You're always fighting and can't seem to get along well. Didn't you see how Yu slammed the doctor's table just to see you?" Xiao Yichen turned to look at Yu, but he turned his face away. His cheeks were red. "Don't listen to Mommy." Chapter 45-31. Xiao Yichen knew that Yu didn't mean what he said, but he was very touched that Yu was willing to do so for him. "It's better not to enter the quarantine zone." Xiao Yichen said to Yu, "I feel that it's very risky. After all, it's better to be cautious." Yu pouted and said, "Then promise me that you'll get better quickly." "I promise you. If I can get better quickly, I'll promise you anything." "I don't care." Yu said domineeringly, "Hurry up and promise me." Xiao Yichen rubbed his head and pouted. "I promise you. I promise you. The three of them couldn't stay in the quarantine zone for too long. Yun Shirshir reminded Xiao Yichen repeatedly before leaving with Mu Yaja and Yu Yu reluctantly. At the same time, at Hurricane Group, Alice suddenly received news about Gong Jie. The remnants of the sacred shrine have been completely eliminated. However, the leader of the mercenaries who was in charge of Gong Jie's safety replied, young Master Jie is also seriously injured. Moreover, with the flu raging, he can't pass through the customs for the time being. The return route to Hurricane Group can't be approved. Also, the FBI is monitoring the hospital. Young Master Jie is being kept in the hospital and can't leave. FBI. Alice held the satellite phone and was puzzled. Why are the FBI people there? Gong Jie was ranked first on the FBI's wanted list and was the FBI's #1 target. They didn't expect Gong Jie to be targeted by the FBI. Damn it. Alice was so angry that she almost threw the phone. If Gong Jie was targeted by the FBI and brought back to the FBI headquarters, he would definitely be sent to military court. Hurricane Group was an important obstacle to international security. As for Gong Jie, international security laws were applicable. Once convicted, the Gong Jie would face hundreds of years in prison. At that time, once he was locked up in the military prison, it would be extremely difficult for him to leave. Alice immediately reported the news to Gong Xiaoying. When Gong Xiaoying heard the news, he said without thinking, In my opinion, the remaining members of the Sacred Hall of Light are bait used by the FBI to attract Gong Jie. Where is little Jie now? He's in the East African Neutral Hospital. He's currently under the protection of the East African president, but once he leaves the hospital, the FBI will have reason to arrest him immediately. Gong Xiaoying lowered his head and fell into deep thought. The president of East Africa had a good relationship with the Hurricanes. Usually, when there was an armed war, the Hurricanes would provide a lot of military assistance to East Africa. The FBI belonged to the M Federation. Therefore, they did not have the authority to make arrests in East Africa. However, if Gong Jie left the hospital, then anything could happen. With the military strength that little Jie brought, we won't be able to safely cover little Jie's departure for the time being. I'm thinking if I should send some troops over, but the international air route can't be approved. Now that the global flu crisis is over, it's very tense. Gong Xiaoying said, so what? If they don't approve, then fly over by force and bring him back. No matter how powerful one's background was, if a private jet wanted to fly, it had to be approved by the international air route. However, if they didn't get permission to fly by force, it would be considered a black flight. If it was in local territory, it might not be a big deal. At most, they would face a huge compensation. Chapter 45-32. If they were forced to fly, they might face a small skirmish. It's too dangerous. Alice still had some lingering fears. If we were to be shot down as a terrorist attack, the losses would outweigh the gains. Then can you think of another way to bring Xiao Jie back? Gong Xiaoying asked her. Alice was silent. I didn't expect you to do it like this. No matter what price I have to pay, I want you to bring him back unharmed. Yes, I understand. Alice had just walked out of Gong Xiaoying's room when she saw Hua Jin standing at the door anxiously. When he saw her, he immediately rushed over. I heard that there's news about Gong Jie? Alice was a little surprised. How did you know? Hua Jin was a little helpless. I just eavesdropped on you. I saw you rushing into the study, so I was worried that something had happened to Gong Jie. Alice turned around and looked at him warily. She immediately pulled him aside and warned him sternly, you shouldn't have eavesdropped on my conversation with Master. If he finds out, he'll be angry. Moreover, you're not a member of Hurricane. You shouldn't have eavesdropped on my conversation with him. But you didn't tell me anything. I didn't have time. It was an emergency. Hua Jin lowered his head. Sorry. After a pause, he said, I just heard you say that there's news about Gong Jie? But he's injured. Injured? Hua Jin was even more nervous now. He grabbed her shoulders tightly. Is it serious? Is it life-threatening? It's not a big deal if he's injured, but he's being targeted by the FBI. FBI? When Hua Jin heard this, he was a little confused. What's wrong with the FBI? From what he knew, or perhaps it was because he had been taught in movies, the FBI was the righteous party. Alice narrowed her eyes and looked at him, guessing what he was thinking. Do you think that the FBI is no big deal? That they're the righteous party and won't do anything to Xianxia? Yeah, what else? You seem to have forgotten. Alice reminded him faintly, Hurricane is not the righteous party. Xianxia is the crown prince of Hurricane and is also a thorn in the side of the Federal Security Organization. If the FBI catches Xianxia, he'll definitely be sent to the military court. Military court? Hua Jin grew even more nervous. What will happen then? He'll be sentenced. You can ransom him. Do you think the international court? Hua Jin was even more confused now. Then, if I'm sentenced, how long will it be? A few hundred years. You can understand it as a life sentence. In international law, sentences are accumulated according to the level of the crime. Many war criminals were sentenced to hundreds of years in prison, which was equivalent to life imprisonment. Usually, in a domestic murder case, no matter how many victims there were, it would be considered as intentional homicide. But in the Anglo-American legal system and the international court, every person killed would be convicted of murder. In the end, the criminal punishment for each crime would be added together, resulting in a sentence of hundreds of years. Hua Jin widened his eyes in shock. Hundreds of years. Anyway, the most important thing now is to bring Xianxia back as soon as possible. That's scary. Hua Jin reacted. How could he forget that Xianxia was the #1 target on the wanted list? Chapter 45:33. Then what should we do? Hua Jin said, we have to save him as soon as possible. I'll go and approve the flight route first. Alice said, you don't have to worry about anything. Just stay on the island. I want to go too. Alice glared at him. What are you going to do? I can help a little, right? Alice was speechless. You go, as long as you don't drag me down. Okay. I promise that I won't be a burden. Hua Jin thought that she had agreed and made a solemn vow. Alice glared at him, but she didn't have any temper. Anyway, you just stay on the island. Alice left without looking back. Hua Jin looked at the direction she left unwillingly and clenched his fists. Alice, the flight route still can't be approved. East Africa was not a peaceful place now. In addition to the war, there was an outbreak of influenza and the fierce plague brought about by the war. The epidemic spread, and the international air routes had been blocked, all the routes to and from East Africa. At present, the war was in a stalemate. In addition, the troops of various countries could not enter East Africa. If it's not allowed, then we'll fly by force. Alice gave the order, and the logistics department immediately went to prepare the materials needed for the flight. Alice asked Vermilion Bird to dispatch 3 troops of mercenaries. The number of mercenaries was not important, but the quality. This time, in order to bring Xianxia back safely, Vermilion Bird dispatched almost all the elites to Alice. They set off at a quiet dawn. Alice calculated the time. If there were no accidents, they would land in East Africa at night. The flight route avoided other countries as much as possible. At present, East Africa had fallen, and it would not pose any threat to the flight and landing. As long as they did not pass through other countries, it should be fine. This kind of thing could not be foolproof, but Alice avoided all the accidents as much as possible. At dawn, the mercenaries boarded the plane in an orderly manner. After Alice counted the supplies and the number of people, she found that there was one more person. He guessed that Vermilion Bird must have felt that this person was not enough, so she sent another mercenary. Thus, he did not think too much and prepared to set off. The hatch slowly closed. Wearing the combat suit, Hua Jin carried the heavy combat bag. Looking at the tightly shut cabin door, he finally let out a sigh of relief. When Alice dispatched the mercenaries, he secretly stole a house, disguised himself as a mercenary, and boarded the plane. Although Alice had repeatedly emphasized how dangerous this trip was, he still didn't care. He didn't know what possessed him, but when he thought of the danger Xianxia was in, he couldn't stay on the island and wait for his return. He could only repeatedly warn himself not to be a burden to Xianxia. even though he knew that his actions were a little rash, but Hua Jin heaved a deep sigh. Beside him, a mercenary spoke. Everyone be vigilant. We are facing the FBI this time. The FBI is the most treacherous. In order to achieve their goals, they will do anything. In short, be vigilant. Understood. The one who gave the order was a relatively authoritative captain. Hua Jin looked at him and did not speak. After dawn, the sky turned white. The plane finally took off. Chapter 45-34. Hua Jin was jolted awake by a strong jolt. He opened his eyes in shock. The fuselage was traveling through the airflow and was shaking violently. However, the mercenaries beside him were already used to this kind of jolt. They hugged their combat hugs and continued to sleep. They were indeed well-trained mercenaries. Even their sleeping posture was uniform. Hua Jin was a little thirsty. He rummaged in the combat bag for water. Footsteps were approaching. He raised his head alertly and saw Alice looking over. Before he could lower his cap, Alice exclaimed, "Hua Jin." Hua Jin raised his hand awkwardly and waved at her. "Hi, what a coincidence." Alice also raised her hand and slapped him hard on the top of his head. "Why are you here?" And Alice tugged at his clothes in disgust and asked suspiciously, "What's with your clothes?" Also, what's up with your equipment?" Alice snatched his heavy combat bag and opened it. There were all kinds of dry food, snacks, and drinks. His eyelids suddenly twitched violently. I was afraid that there would be no food and water along the way, so I prepared some in advance. Last time in East Africa, he and Gong Jia almost starved to death. That was because he learned his lesson and prepared dry food in advance, just in case. Alice slapped him on the head again. "That hurts. Do you want to die?" Alice put on a fierce expression and said fiercely, "You can't even protect yourself. Why are you following us? Why are you joining us?" Hua Jin raised his hand and swore, "I swear, I won't drag you guys down. You have such a big bag full of food. Are you running away? Also, the scariest thing in East Africa is not the FBI, but the plague. Do you know about the plague? If you get infected with the plague, your life will be over." Hua Jin pursed his lips. "Anyway, no matter how much you scold me, I'm still going." No one could stop his will. Alice was startled. She looked at Hua Jin, who seemed to be secretly angry, and sighed helplessly. "Okay, I got it. It's useless to say anything now. You've already boarded the plane. Can I still throw you out of the plane?" Hua Jin's face immediately changed from gloomy to affectionate, revealing a puppy-like smile. "You're still laughing?" Hua Jin immediately stopped laughing. Alice turned around and glanced at a man who was staring at her in a daze. She ordered, "Jack. You are in charge of this guy's safety." Jack looked at Hua Jin with disdain. Hua Jin saw the look of disdain in his eyes and pretended not to see it, but he was not convinced in his heart. Was he that weak? Did he have to look at him with such disdain? "I don't need anyone to protect me. I can protect myself." Hua Jin patted his combat bag and said, "I brought my own gun." When in danger, he would never give in. If he was not convinced, he would fight. Alice slapped him again. "Since you're on the plane, you have to obey all orders. Otherwise, if you piss me off, I will really throw you out of the plane." She looked at Hua Jin with a threatening gaze. Chapter 45-35. There wasn't a single light in the hospital ward. The curtains were all drawn, blocking out the bright sunlight outside the window. Gong Jie stood by the window and gently lifted a corner of the curtains. With a strong ray of light, he immediately caught a glimpse of a few blond men in casual clothes walking back and forth below the hospital. No matter how the FBI disguised themselves, their appearance was too obvious among the tan doctors and nurses. This group of people had been loitering around the hospital floor for so long. It was said that the FBI had gathered elites with high IQ, but in his opinion, their IQ was lacking. However, a fool couldn't win against a large number of people. This time, the FBI had sent over 30 fully armed people. They were determined to arrest him and bring him back to the military court. He put down the curtains and turned around. In the room, a few mercenaries were sitting on the sofa, playing with the guns in their hands. Young Master Jie, your injury hasn't healed yet. Go back to bed and lie down. Gong Jie returned to the bed and sat down. When will Alice arrive? If there are no accidents, she should arrive in East Africa tomorrow. How many people did she bring? 3 troops. That's enough. Gong Jie crossed his arms and leaned against the headboard. He said coldly, when we get back, we'll settle the score with the FBI. The FBI is really shrewd. They purposely leaked the news of the remaining members to Hurricane, and Gong Jie cleaned up the remaining members. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Gong Jie's whereabouts were undoubtedly exposed to the FBI's eyes. However, it was still a little difficult to catch him. This hospital was a neutral hospital. It was not bound by any government treaty, nor was it bound by any international law. This was a hospital set up by humanitarian organizations to stop donations. No official organization could carry out any arrest activities here. The FBI was backed by the Federation, so they had no right to arrest anyone in the hospital. However, it was obvious how determined the FBI was to catch him. If he didn't leave the hospital, they would wait at the door. Was Gong Jie going to stay in the hospital for the rest of his life? Thus, the FBI waited at the hospital all night. Originally, Gong Jie didn't care about the FBI. However, after eradicating the remnants of the Sacred Hall's sect, the mercenaries he brought out were greatly weakened. If they were to clash head-on with the FBI, the gains would not make up for the losses. The plane landed smoothly at the airport in East Africa. Instead of calling it an airport, it would be more accurate to call it a wasteland. Previously, the armed forces had wantonly bombed the railways, airports, and all the transportation fortresses into ruins. The plane hovered over the ruins for a long time before landing on a grassy area next to the airport. After the plane landed, everyone got off the plane. Looking at the devastated airport, no one was surprised. They were used to war. Only Hua Jin. He was stunned by the scene in front of him. Living in a peaceful country, he had never thought that war would bring about such cruelty. Even though he had experienced the war personally, East Africa had become like this after not seeing it for such a long time. It was a complete mess, and not a single blade of grass grew. It was said that East Africa had temporarily stopped fighting because of the plague, but no one knew when the war would rage again. The peacekeeping force had already intervened, but now, it was useless. What are you waiting for? Chapter 45-36. Hua Jin asked curiously, are we going straight to the hospital now? Alice frowned and said, let's not go to the hospital first. The flight is tiring. Let's go to the relay station to rest first. Alice had asked Hua Jin to listen to her no matter what. Hua Jin did not dare to make his own decisions. He was afraid that he would cause trouble for her and Gong Jie. At the same time, good news came from the hospital. The Capital Medical University had successfully developed a vaccine against influenza. After several tests, the success rate of the vaccine was guaranteed. However, it would take some time before the vaccine could be put into use. The safety of the vaccine had to be confirmed before it could be widely used. The entire world was in a state of panic in the 2 months between the beginning of the pandemic and the introduction of the vaccine. The Capital Medical University was the first to develop an inactivated vaccine, which shocked the entire world. No one expected country Z to be the first to develop a vaccine against influenza. At that time, they had only received news that the vaccine was successfully developed. No one knew when the vaccine would be put into use. However, this gave Xianxia a glimmer of hope. The successful development of the vaccine meant that the influenza was not invincible. At the same time, she also hoped that the vaccine could be tested and put into use as soon as possible. Xiao Bao's condition had stabilized. The doctor said that his condition would not worsen for the time being. His body was under control, which was the best outcome. However, Xiao Yichen's condition was not as ideal. A week before the vaccine was developed, his condition worsened. Yun Shirshir even signed the donation agreement under the doctor's suggestion. When signing the agreement, Mu Yazhe did not mind signing it. However, this was Xiao Yichen's wish. He did not know if he could survive the flu. He did not know if he could wait until the vaccine was developed. During the development period, the development of the vaccine was kept a secret from the public. Xianxia thought that if he did not survive this time, he would donate his body to the capital medical university to be used in the vaccine experiment. Xianxia could not bear to do that. However, this was Xianxia's wish. That was his body. He had the right to make his own decisions. Although she could not bear to part with it, since it was Xianxia's wish, she had to work hard to fulfill it for him. That night, Xianxia's condition worsened and he was pushed into the operating room. Outside the operating room, Xianxia officially